Chapter 1184. Who is the little guy wearing open crotch pants? She shouted out the answer. She was eager to introduce everything about her hometown to Lan Xian. The little girl grabbed her friend's arm with one hand and pointed at him with the other. Xian, this baby is my cousin. His name is Yangsu. That's right. This little guy is Yangqing and Zheng Shiyi's child. He was born in September last year, and is not even a year old yet. Yangqing named him Yangsu because Yangqing's idol was Sun Tzu from the Three Kingdoms era. When he was young, Yangqing was the same as Yang Yi. His grades weren't good, but he liked to read children's books, especially those about the Three Kingdoms. Note: this world doesn't have the romance of the Three Kingdoms. Therefore, Yangqing didn't know when it started, but he started to worship the handsome and brave Sun Tzu, who was open-minded by nature. There is no need to repeat the history. Actually, when Tong Tong came back for Chinese New Year, he saw little Yangsu. But how could Tong Tong remember? Moreover, at that time, little Yangsu was still a baby. Now he has grown up a lot. After Yang Yi locked the car, he carried the little guy and played with him. Interestingly, little Yangsu was not afraid of strangers. When Yang Yi carried him, he only stared at this unfamiliar uncle with his round eyes. He seemed to be in a daze. Where did Qing and Shiyi go? Why didn't they look after their son? Yang Yi laughed and asked, Yangsu is a quiet person, just like his father. What if he is taken away by someone? Didn't I look after him? Yang Chonggui said angrily. Who dares to take my grandson away in my Yang family? Yang Yi was helpless. He couldn't communicate with old Master Yang, so Yang Huan helped to answer. Second brother is at the village square. Second sister-in-law is keeping accounts for someone, so second brother said that he could accompany second sister-in-law there and wait for you. Didn't you see him? Yang Yi was enlightened. He patted Lan Xian's head and smiled. I think he didn't recognize my car. He changed his car today because of this little guy. I'm not a little fellow. This little brother is the little fellow. Lan Xian mischievously twisted her chubby waist and dodged away, then grumbled indignantly. Cici, who was watching from the side, laughed happily. Then I'll go and call second brother back. Yang Huan volunteered to ride the bicycle out in a hurry. Behind her, Cici looked enviously at her auntie's elegant back, and no one knew what she was thinking. Little Su has grown so big? Mo Fei handed little Huawei to her grandma, who was smiling so much that her wrinkles almost bloomed. Then she came to Yang Yi's side with interest and smiled, wanting to hug little Yangsu. However, she had forgotten that there was still a little Bai eyeing her from behind. At first, when Tong Tong asked his grandma to hug him, he did not have any objections. This was because Tong Tong already remembered how his grandma looked like when his mom kept saying the word grandma. However, when he was in his grandma's arms and heard her say something that he did not understand, Tong Tong blinked his eyes and pouted. He turned his head and wanted to look for his mom. I don't know how to communicate with my grandma anymore. However, Tong Tong was shocked to see that his mom was smiling while hugging the child who was wearing open crotch pants. How could this be? In Tong Tong's memory, his mom had only hugged him before. It was fine for his sister and dad to let his mom hug him. However, Tong Tong felt a sense of crisis when he saw the child who was wearing open crotch pants. The little jar of vinegar that was born in a jar of vinegar was suddenly unsealed. Oh, Mama want Mama hug. In a hurry, little Tao babbled and stammered out a sentence. Dong Yuer was all smiles. She wanted to play with her eldest grandson for a while, but she didn't expect that little Momo would suddenly struggle fiercely. He didn't want to be with his grandmother at all, which made the old woman dumbfounded. Wasn't he fine just now? Yang Chonggui snorted and said proudly, You don't even know how to hug a child. How is it comfortable to hug him like this? Give it to me, give it to me. However, Tong Tong only wanted his mom. Even his grandfather, who was good at juggling, could not do it. He sobbed and pushed away his grandfather's hand. He pouted pitifully and tears welled up in his eyes. Mom, do you not want mommy anymore? Murphy had no choice but to return little Tong Tong to Yang Yi's arms. She hugged the crying Tong Tong and coaxed him. Why are you crying? Aren't you always fine? Why can't Grandpa and Grandma hug you? Grandpa and Grandma are so sad. Tong Tong hugged his mom's neck and refused to let go. His emotions seemed to have been ignited, and he could not stop crying. He buried his face in his mom's arms and cried nonstop. Shishi, why is mommy crying? Lon Xian asked in confusion. I don't know either. Cici couldn't figure it out either. No one at the scene knew the real reason why little Momo was crying. The little girl could only frown her delicate little brows and ponder. Maybe my brother cried because he doesn't remember my grandparents? That was not the case. Tong Tong, who was back in his mom's arms, stopped crying. He felt like he had regained what he had lost, so he did not want to leave his mom's arms. The news of Yang Yi's return spread quickly in the village. After all, he was a big boss and had brought tremendous changes to the village. Not long after Yang Yi came back, some villagers came to visit. Yang Yi and Yang Qing had to move out a bench and sit under the shade of a tree in the yard to chat with the guests. Regardless of the adults who were bored and setting up the Dragon Gate array, or Tong Tong who was clinging to his mom and guarding against his little brother, Shishi and Lon Xian could not sit still in the house. They came out again and could not wait to experience their village life. Grandpa, Grandpa! Shishi pulled up Yang Chonggue, who loved her the most, and said excitedly, That, where did you put the rice? Grandpa. Xian air, and I want to feed the chicks. When they entered the yard just now, Shishi had already seen a group of chickens in the yard. In addition to hens and roosters, there were also old hens with a group of chicks. Shishi was with her dad and was busy greeting her grandparents, so she did not have time to play with them. Okay. Grandpa will get it for you. Yang Chonggue, who was trusted, suddenly felt that his granddaughter was the best. A gentle smile appeared on his serious old face. He got up and went to the kitchen to grab a small bag of white rice for Shishi and Lon Xian. The chickens raised in the village rarely had the chance to eat corn and rice. After all, these grains were precious. Who would be willing to feed these chickens with the grains that they worked so hard to grow? Most of the time, they ate vegetables, radishes, weeds, and the small insects that they pulled out from the ground. It was good enough that they could eat 5 grains once a week. As for the leftovers at home, they were usually left for the dogs. They would never have a chance to eat them. Therefore, Shishi and Lon Xian did not know that Yang Chonggue did not care about the grains at all for the 2 little cuties. He even prepared white rice for them to cook. Steamed Bun, who came back with the car to visit relatives, did not know that life in the village was so hard. He walked around the yard and got to know his fellow sufferers who were tied up in the corner. He followed behind Shishi and watched what his little master was doing. Chapter 1185. Seeing a person and a dog approaching, the rooster, who had been squatting on the straw pile and dozing off, raised his head vigilantly. The hens running around on the ground quivered and scattered. However, they were free-range chickens after all, so they were not afraid of humans. After running 2 steps away, they acted as if nothing had happened and swayed their chicken claws. Shishi followed behind her grandfather, and her happy gaze fell on the group of little chicks with white feathers with spots. They were following the mother hen, and looking for food everywhere. Their little round heads raised and turned from time to time. They were so cute. I love these chicks so much. Shishi said excitedly. She grabbed some white rice from the small bag, and gently threw it to the chicks. However, the chicks did not appreciate it. They thought that this terrifying human had thrown a bomb, and were so frightened that they ran away with the big hen. Although the chicks' legs were short, they ran very fast and ran far away in a flash. Steamed Bun went over excitedly, but found that it was not delicious, nor was it a small ball that he could bite and bring back. Steamed Bun ran back to the little master's side in disappointment, wagging his tail and looking up at the little master. Unfortunately, the little master's attention was not on him. Shishi, they ran away. Lon Xian was amused by the sight of this, and she turned to Shishi with a smile. Before Shishi could respond, there was a change in the place where Shishi threw the rice. The big hen ran away with the chicks, but 2 little hens had good eyesight. When they saw that it was delicious, they immediately ran over from the side and quickly pecked at the rice. Their speed was very fast, as if they were afraid that someone would snatch it from them. This feeling was right. Seeing them eating so happily, the other hens and roosters also rushed over. Although there was not much rice left on the ground, they could still eat a few grains if they were quick enough. At this time, the big hen, who had reacted, hurriedly ran back. The group of chicks was stunned for a moment and followed their mother in confusion. Unfortunately, mist was missed. When they arrived, the rice on the ground had been pecked clean by those greedy fellows. Not a single grain was left. Aya! The little chick has no rice to eat. Lon Xian watched the show and shouted, "It's okay, little chick, I still have more. I'll give it to you." She murmured softly as if she was comforting a chicken. She lowered her head and took out a handful of rice from the bag and threw it to the chickens. At this moment, although the chicks were still frightened and dodging, under the leadership of the big hen, they did not run away, but immediately turned back. However, there was still a large group of hens and roosters eyeing them covetously. A big rooster with a fiery red comb, like a low-flying bomber, lowered its neck and rushed up, driving away all the chicks. It and the other hens who rushed over enjoyed the white rice together. Oh, she stomped her feet anxiously, pouted her little mouth, and cried out unhappily, "Big roosters, they're bullying people. They stole little chicks' food." Lon Xian tilted her little head, looked at Shishi, and asked in a low voice, Then what should we do? If the chicks don't have food, they won't grow up. If they don't grow up, then they might not taste good." The two little girls whispered together to think of a solution. "I have an idea." Shishi's tightly knitted eyebrows suddenly relaxed. She raised a white and thin finger, and said to Lon Xian happily, "Xianair, can you help me stop those big chickens? If they don't come over, then I can feed the chicks rice." Lon Xian was in a difficult position. She looked at the big rooster, shrunk her neck, pouted her little mouth and asked, But Shishi, what if the big rooster bites me? I'm afraid of its mouth, it's so scary." Shishi regretfully scratched her head, handed her bag to Lon Xian, and said generously, "Then Xianair, I'll stop them. You feed the chicks, you have to let them eat until they're full." Thus, with the cooperation of the two little girls, a chaotic scene appeared. Lon Xian scattered a handful of rice, and the little fat girl, who was a little scared, quickly dodged. At this time, the experienced big roosters and hens swarmed over. "No, you guys, this is not for you to eat," Shishi shouted, and like a hero who saw injustice on the road, she opened her arms and hurriedly rushed up. Chickens are still afraid of people. Whether it's the adult roosters, hens, or small chicks, they were all frightened by Shishi and hurriedly dodged. "Shishi, don't chase those chicks." Although Lon Xian was a little scared, she still enthusiastically called out from the side, "I'm chasing the big chicks." Shishi cried. She was not tired of chasing those hens who couldn't help but go around in a circle and then come back. Soon Lon Xian happily called out the good news, "Shishi, the chicks eat rice." "Really?" Shishi was very happy. She turned around and looked at those chicks. But she didn't expect that at this time. Another old hen took the opportunity to squeeze over. "Oh, why are you so disobedient?" Shishi anxiously cried. She had to anxiously drive them away again. After all, there were so many chickens, they could attack from all directions. Shishi could only be exhausted, blocking the east wall to pay the west wall. Fortunately, Lon Xian didn't scatter much rice. After a while, the chicks finished eating. "Shishi, you feed the chicks, I want to play too." Lon Xian realized that those ferocious roosters didn't seem as scary as she had imagined. When Sisi ran over, they all ran away. Lon Xian was itching to go after them. She also wanted to experience the feeling of chasing after those bad guys. However, Lon Xian only saw Shishi's lively figure when she ran diligently. She didn't see Shishi's hard work running around. It was not long before Lon Xian was infuriated by these all-pervasive chickens. Her short and chubby legs could not catch up with so many chickens. Moreover, she was running around under the sun. Soon, Lon Xian was so hot that she was panting heavily. After running for less than 10 seconds, the little girl was sweating profusely and complaining that she was tired. "Aya, Sisi, it's better that you do it." "Okay then." She was still full of vitality. She handed the bag of rice to Lon Xian. And then the little girl's slender legs ran quickly, chasing the big cackling roosters. "Cackle, cackle. You can't eat the chicken's rice." Shishi ran and imitated the sound of the roosters. She felt that it was funny and couldn't help but laugh. The little girl's bell-like laughter attracted the attention of the adults. However, Shishi was also a little tired. After playing for a while, she was called by her father to drink a cup of water before continuing to play. Fortunately, at this time, Steamed Bun, who had been running around with the little master but was only watching in confusion, finished his apprenticeship. He followed Shishi's footsteps and chased the roosters and hens. Woof woof. Steamed Bun bared his teeth and barked beside the little master. The roosters were so scared that they didn't dare to come over. But for some reason, Steamed Bun, who had always been very timid, gave people a funny feeling at this moment. At first, the chicks were scared by Steamed Bun and shrank to their mother chicken's side. But after a while, they found that this big guy wouldn't look at them, so they gathered their courage and came over to peck the rice. In front of delicious food, every chick was now little fatty Xian. Chapter 1186. Originally, Yang Yi thought that it would take some time for Lan Xian to adapt to the countryside. After all, no matter how beautiful Wadeaku village was in the past 2 years, it couldn't be compared with Lan Xian's hometown in Jiangnan. Jiangcheng was the provincial capital, and the villages below were also very rich. Naturally, the houses and roads were clean and tidy. If it weren't for the farmland and the waterways, it would look like a traditional residential area. It didn't look like a village at all. However, Lan Xian didn't feel uncomfortable at all in Wadeaku village. On the first day, she and Shishi fed the chickens together. The next day, the two girls curiously followed Yang Yi to herd the cows. Lan Xian didn't complain at all except that it was hot. Therefore, Yang Chonggue was very satisfied with this chubby girl who was as sweet as his granddaughter. After the old man knew that Yang Yi recognized this girl as his goddaughter, he also examined Lan Xian. Since Yang Chonggue recognized Lan Xian, that meant that he regarded Lan Xian as one of his own. The old man began to worry about the chubby girl's health. Lan Xian's facial features are still beautiful, but the premise is that she has to lose weight. If she doesn't lose weight, it will be difficult for her to get married in the future. It will also be a burden to her body. Yang Chonggue pointed out seriously at dinner the next night. Lan Xian? Lan Xian was still a little unaccustomed to this name. She sat at the end of the table and tore the crab's thigh with great effort. She ate with relish and looked around in confusion. Who is Lan Xian? She couldn't get involved in the adults' conversation, but her ears were like radar. She had been eavesdropping. At this moment, she enthusiastically came over and whispered, Xian, my grandpa is talking about you. Although she weakly said a few words for Lan Xian, Yang Yi couldn't resist the old man's concern for Lan Xian. Yang Chonggue decided that tomorrow morning, Lan Xian and Shishi would get up together and exercise with their grandpa. At that time, Lan Xian was addicted to eating the fresh and tender crab. She just agreed in a daze. She didn't realize the seriousness of the matter. Therefore, on the morning of the third day in Wadeaku village, Lan Xian couldn't continue to sleep in. Early in the morning, she and Shishi were woken up by Yang Yi. Sisi was fine. She was used to waking up early. After being woken up by her father, she slowly slid down from the edge of the bed. Then, she rubbed her sleepy eyes and pouted her little pink lips as she waited for Lan Xian at the side. Lan Xian was very uncomfortable. She hadn't slept enough yet. At first, Lan Xian fell asleep as soon as her head hit the pillow. Yang Yi turned her over, and she continued to sleep on her stomach. When he pulled her two little arms up, the little fat girl raised her head, closed her eyes, and hummed impatiently like a little pig. As soon as he put her back, Lan Xian immediately curled up again, found a comfortable position, and continued to fall into a peaceful sleep. During this time, Shishi had already woken up. She looked at Lan Xian being pulled by her father. It was very funny, and she couldn't help but giggle. Look, Shishi is laughing at you. Hurry up and get up. Yesterday you promised Grandpa that you would get up and exercise. Yang Yi rubbed the little fat girl's head, and her fluffy hair was scratched into a chicken's nest by him. Lan Xian was so noisy that she couldn't sleep. She kicked her legs and cried, "Don't get up." She wasn't really crying. She cried for a long time, but no tears fell from her eyes. In the end, it took more than 10 minutes for Yang Yi to wake up Lan Xian and take her and Shishi to wash up. After the cold and comfortable well water moistened the towel, Father Yang wiped it on her round face. Lan Xian was so cold that she shivered and recovered a little ability to think. Comfortable? Yang Yi smiled and handed the towel to the little girl who was still pouting and unwilling. Shishi thought that her father was talking to her. She wiped her face and her little arms and giggled. Papa, the water here is so strange. It's so cold, like the water in the refrigerator. It's super comfortable. Because I'm so hot. Don't touch so much water in the morning. Seeing this, Yang Yi hurriedly stopped Shishi and said with a smile. Just wipe your face. If you wipe your body, you'll catch a cold. Go rinse your mouth, drink some water later, and then exercise with Grandpa. Lan Xian woke up. She wiped her face and felt the coolness of the well water. She muttered unhappily, I don't want to get up. I don't want to exercise. Yang Yi smiled and said, How can you do that? You promised Grandpa last night. You can't let him down. But, Lan Xian stammered and couldn't find an excuse to refute. Exercise well and sweat a little. When you're tired and hungry later, come back for breakfast. Yang Yi will make you delicious fried noodles later. Yang Yi encouraged. Okay. Papa, the fried noodles you make are so delicious. Are there eggs? Shishi happily rushed to say. Of course there are shredded meat, mushrooms fried with noodles, put in the super delicious sauce fried until golden yellow, and sprinkled a handful of scallions. It'll definitely be so delicious that you want to eat your tongue. Yang Yi smiled and said. Shishi raised her small head and smiled sweetly at her father. He, of course not. How can I eat my tongue? Lan Xian was still a little confused when she woke up in the morning. Her mind couldn't keep up with Shishi, but now she was drooling after hearing the conversation between Shishi and her father. She quickly pulled Yang Yi's hand and cried, Papa Yang, I want to eat. Then hurry up and exercise with Grandpa. The more you sweat, the more delicious it'll be, Yang Yi said enchantingly. Okay. Although she was still a little unwilling, Lan Xian whispered with her small mouth at the thought of the delicious fried noodles. Yang Chonggui was still very kind and affectionate to the two girls at home. He couldn't bear to scold them, but when they were outside, the old man proudly put his hands behind his back and put on a straight face, just like a general marching to war. He walked in front solemnly and mightily, scaring the young people who had been scolded by him. When they met him, they all obediently came over to greet him. Actually, Yang Chonggui just wanted to show off his power in front of his granddaughters. He wanted the two girls to see how high their grandfather's prestige was in the village. But he didn't know that the two girls were a little frightened by him, especially Lan Xian. She thought that she had delayed and made her grandfather angry. So, Lan Xian and Shishi obediently followed behind Yang Chonggui. And the three of them walked to the martial arts field in the village. Yang Yi actually woke up earlier. Before he woke the two girls up, he had already run 2 laps and practiced martial arts. Now he didn't accompany Shishi and Lan Xian to exercise. Instead, he stayed at home and prepared breakfast for the two girls. After all, he had promised them. Xian probably hasn't drunk this kind of soy milk that was ground by the stone mill. In the kitchen, Yang Yi took out the soybeans that he had started to soak last night and slowly poured them into the stone mill. Then his right hand slowly pushed the mill, and his left hand slowly added water. Soon milky white soy milk slowly flowed out. It took a lot of effort to make soy milk, and because there were many people in the family, Yang Yi ground more soy milk and prepared to cook a big pot of soy milk. The soy milk bought outside was diluted with water, so it was almost as thin as water. It was not like the soy milk ground by himself. The soy milk ground by himself had sufficient ingredients, was clean, and was of high quality. The soy milk ground by himself was still thick even after filtration. After it was boiled, a strong fragrance came to the nose. Plus, he added sugar, so the little guys would definitely like it. After boiling the soy milk, Yang Yi began to prepare the ingredients for the fried noodles. But at this time, a sweaty little head popped in from the kitchen door. Chapter 1187. Yang Yi heard the noise behind him. He turned around and found that it was Lan Xian, who was sweating profusely. However, there was someone behind her. Shishi's nervous voice came weakly. Xian, is that my papa? It turned out that these two little girls were peeping. Yang Yi didn't know that it was actually Lan Xian who wanted to come to the kitchen to inquire. Shishi had to follow her. If he hadn't been in the kitchen, the two little girls would have probably run away. Why are you back so soon? Yang Yi smiled and asked in surprise. Hearing her father's voice, Shishi was relieved. The kitchen door was quite big, but she still squeezed Lan Xian into the kitchen. I wanted to see if there was fried noodles, but I didn't seem to smell it. Lan Xian scratched her head and said without answering the question. Shishi chirped in response to her father's question. Papa, it's like this. Xian ran for a while, and then she said that she had a stomachache and wanted to poop. So Grandpa came back with us. Stomachache? Yang Yi was still nervous, but he soon felt that something was wrong. Lan Xian's face was relaxed, her eyes were bright, and she looked around. It didn't seem like she had a stomachache. No, I don't have a stomachache. Yes, it doesn't hurt anymore. Sure enough, Lan Xian was slightly embarrassed, and she hurriedly stuttered as she explained. Shishi blinked and said briskly. But Xian, don't you want to poop? In fact, there was no need for Shishi to continue. Yang Yi had already understood. He helplessly pointed at the little girl and said with a smile, You must be lying to Grandpa that you have a stomachache and want to be lazy, right? Lan Xian saw that she had been seen through. She stuck out her little tongue, and was a little embarrassed. She slightly pouted and explained, I'm not lying to Grandpa. It's just that I'm super tired, and Grandpa said that I have to exercise a lot more. I don't want to exercise anymore. Even Yang Yi could tell, let alone Yang Chonggui, who had taught his two sons. However, he did not make things difficult for Lan Xian. After all, she was a girl. The old man's heart ached for her. Seeing that she was sweating profusely after running for a while, he went with the flow and did not expose her. But what you're doing is wrong. Xian, it's not that Papa Yang wants to criticize you, but think about it yourself. Grandpa accompanied you to exercise so early in the morning. Did he want you to have a good body? He was thinking about you, wasn't he? Yang Yi put down the kitchen utensils, washed his hands, and said softly. Lan Xian pursed her little mouth and lowered her little head. Shishi looked at her father, and then looked at her little friend. She took her father's hand, shook it, and whispered, Papa, don't say any more. Don't blame Xian, okay? She's going to cry. How can I blame her? I'm analyzing this matter with her. Yang Yi patted Shishi's head and said with a smile, Xian, you're a very good child, but you're still young. Sometimes you don't think things through. Don't make the same mistake in the future. I'll forgive you. Father Yang was much gentler than her father. Lan Xian could accept such criticism. The chubby little girl pouted her little mouth and moved closer. Just like Shishi, she hugged Father Yang's other hand, rubbed it gently and whispered, I know I'm wrong. I shouldn't have lied to Grandpa. That's right. If you feel that you're too tired to exercise in the future, you can directly report it to Grandpa. I believe that Grandpa still loves you very much and won't let you be too tired. Yang Yi squeezed her little hand with a smile and said in a clear voice, Okay. Shishi, Xian, let go of my hand. If you keep hugging me like this, I won't be able to eat breakfast later. The atmosphere suddenly relaxed. Shishi and Lan Xian both giggled, and let go of Yang Yi's hand at the same time. Lan Xian was a little nervous, but Shishi regained her liveliness again. She asked all kinds of questions with great interest. Papa, are you making fried noodles? Yang Yi poured a pot of water, turned on the fire, and casually replied, Yes. Papa, what about the noodles? The noodles are going to be cooked now. Look. Yang Yi smiled and took out a packet of noodles from the black plastic bag next to him. When the water is boiling, you can put them in and cook them. But aren't we eating fried noodles? Why do we have to cook them? Shishi asked in confusion. Because the noodles have to be boiled. They don't need to be cooked. We can use them for frying after draining the water. Yang Yi put the noodles back and patiently explained while preparing other ingredients. At this time he saw the sausages hanging on the wall and asked with a smile, "Exionnaire, do you want to put some sausages in it?" In fact, Yang Yi was also teasing Lan Xian, for fear that she was still unhappy. Lan Xian suddenly became interested. She quickly came over and watched Papa Yang take off the sausages. She said excitedly, "Yes, yes. The sausages are super delicious." "Papa, what is this?" She was very interested in the kitchen in her hometown. She always felt that it was very different from the kitchen at home. After a while, the little girl's questions came one after another. Yang Yi answered patiently, but She asked too many questions. In the end, he couldn't help but think of a way. He poured a cup of soy milk for each of the two little girls and asked them to sit on a stool and drink it. "Can't you shut your mouths?" Of course, this won't work. After she took a sip, her eyes lit up and she shouted happily, "Hey, it's delicious! Exionnaire. Wow, Exionnaire, you drank half of it. Wasn't it?" While you were praising her, she was drinking it all the time. "Papa, I know. This is soy milk made from soybeans, because the soy milk made from black beans is black, right?" She also drank a lot at home. She drank it happily and didn't forget to chat with her father. Lan Xian finished it quickly. Of course, this small cup couldn't satisfy her. The little fat girl licked her lips greedily and said, "I want more." "You can't drink so much now. If you drink more, you won't be able to eat fried noodles later," Yang Yi said with a smile. "You can drink soy milk after eating fried noodles." When Lan Xian heard that she might not be able to eat fried noodles, she quickly pushed the cup on the table and said nervously, "Then I won't drink it. I want to eat fried noodles." She tilted her head and thought for a moment. She asked puzzledly, "But Papa, why can't Exionnaire eat fried noodles after drinking soy milk? But can I still drink soy milk after eating fried noodles?" "Yes. They ate the same thing before and after. Why can't I eat fried noodles after drinking soy milk first? Then I can drink soy milk after eating fried noodles. Why is this?" Yang Yi was dumbfounded. He found that he couldn't answer such a simple question. "Ahem, Shi, let's not talk about this problem first. Papa will give you a task. You and Exionnaire bring disposable cups and pour soy milk for Grandpa, Grandma, Uncle, Little Aunt, and Mom. Everyone has a cup." Yang Yi awkwardly changed the topic. "Okay." Shi and Lan Xian were very obedient. The two girls responded in unison and began to get busy. Yang Yi finally had some peace. He first fried the eggs, then began to fry the meat, vegetables, and noodles. Behind him, Shi was very diligent. The little girl was praised by Grandpa, Grandma, and Little Aunt. She smiled happily and ran in and out. After delivering a few cups of soy milk, Lan Xian was reluctant to move when she smelled the rich fragrance coming from the frying pan. She was lazy for a moment and leaned over to look. Yang Yi said with a smile, "Exionnaire, do you want some chili sauce? We don't put too much, but a little spicy taste will make the fried noodles more delicious." Lan Xian had been swallowing her saliva for a long time. She excitedly jumped up and down and shouted, "Yes, yes. I like spicy. It's super delicious." With such an enthusiastic little girl, Yang Yi not only felt a sense of accomplishment, but also believed that when everyone ate breakfast together later, it would be delicious. Chapter 1188. In the countryside, there was always an endless supply of food to eat. Especially because of Yang Yi's return, the simple villagers in the village all sent some delicious food from their homes or fields over when they visited. For the past few days, Lanxin and Cece's little mouths had not been idle at all. Sometimes they would eat peanuts that had just been plucked from the ground and boiled with water and salt. Sometimes, they would eat them while sitting cross-legged on the armchairs in the hall. Sometimes, they would eat sweet and soft golden roasted sweet potatoes that were sent over by the little brother next door. Lanxin, who could not wait any longer, complained that it was hot while eating happily. This morning, Steamed Bun's mother, Li Shupo, also came to visit. He had just plucked a batch of fresh corn from the fields and brought a bamboo basket over. The little guys had a new experience and food to eat. "Wow, is this corn?" After the guests left, Shishi and Lan Xian immediately came over curiously. Shishi exclaimed in surprise. But this corn is different from the ones at home. Behind the two little girls, there was a little kid. After the first 2 days of vigilance, Tong Tong finally let go of his guard against the little guy who was wearing open-crotch pants. Perhaps he felt that his mother still loved him, and little Yang Su was not a threat to him. After not pestering his mother, Tong Tong played with his sister. He still felt that his sister Shishi was the best. She knew how to play with everything. When he was with his sister, Tong Tong also experienced feeding chicks and observing cows through the fence. These were all very magical experiences to him. It was the same now. When Tong Tong heard his sister's surprised exclamation, he could not hold back anymore. He pushed away his mother's hand and slid down from his mother's lap. His little butt swayed as he moved closer to his sister's. He curiously looked at the corn buds that were overflowing out of the bamboo basket. The corn at home is also like this. It's just that what you usually see are the hard leaves and ears of corn that Dad has already peeled off in the market. Yang Yi picked up a corn, peeled the leaves, and showed them the light yellow kernels. He smiled and said, "These were just picked from the ground, so what you see is the original appearance of corn." "Wow, it's sweet corn. I love eating this kind of corn." Lan Xian cried out in surprise when she saw the yellow, plump corn kernels. "I prefer the white and black ones because they're soft and sticky and delicious." Cece, on the other hand, had her own thoughts, but she still giggled and said, "But I also like to eat sweet corn." While the two girls were discussing fervently, little Momo was beside his sister, and only recognized the corn after looking at it for a long time. He hadn't learned how to call the corn, so he pointed at the corn in surprise and called out to his father. "This is called corn." Yang Yi smiled and taught Tong Tong word by word. Fish rice. Tong Tong was learning things faster and faster. Although his pronunciation was not perfect at first, he could say it like his father. After a while he could say it fluently. Corn. Not bad. Yang Yi gave the little guy a thumbs up and smiled. "Do you want to eat it? Do you want to eat it?" Tong Tong could understand such a simple question. He was so happy that he squinted his eyes, nodded, and giggled. Lan Xian and Shishi, who were next to them, cried out in excitement. Since the little guys all wanted to eat corn, Yang Yi picked a few and went to the kitchen to cook them. The way he cooked the corn was different from the way the villagers cooked the corn in the pot. Yang Yi peeled off all the leaves of the corn, washed them, and put them into the pot. Of course, just like how the villagers cooked corn, Yang Yi added water and a little salt. However, Yang Yi also put some tender corn husks on the surface. Of course, the corn whiskers were good stuff, so Yang Yi did not want to waste them. After plucking the corn whiskers, he wrapped them in a small gauze and put them into the pot. It seemed a little unnecessary to cook the corn this way. Couldn't he just peel off the corn after cooking it? However, Yang Yi still thought it was better to cook the corn this way. This way, not only would it retain the original fragrance of the corn, but it would also make the corn look clean and tidy. It would look like a piece of art instead of an unprocessed jade. To put it bluntly, Yang Yi was a little stubborn. He just wanted to look good. After the corn was cooked, the lid of the pot was removed, and a sweet aroma wafted out. Lan Xian and Cece, who were eagerly waiting at the side, couldn't help but close their eyes with intoxicated expressions. Yang Yi picked up the corn with a pair of tongs, drained the water, and then put it on the big plate on the table. Lan Xian, who had been swallowing her saliva, could not help but reach out her small hand to grab one. This was what Yang Yi did not notice. Fortunately, she shouted in surprise, "No, Xian, you can't eat it yet." Yang Yi heard it. He looked back and quickly took Lan Xian's hand and said with a smile, "Xian, you have to wait a moment." "Why?" Lan Xian looked at the corn reluctantly and asked in confusion. She said seriously, "Because we have to give it to Grandpa and Grandma first. Papa said that we should respect the old and love the young." This was some of the principles that Yang Yi taught the two girls at the dinner table recently. However, Lan Xian seemed to have forgotten it, but she remembered it very clearly. Yang Yi didn't expect Cece to think so much. He didn't know whether to laugh or cry as he shook his head and said with a smile, "It's great that Cece can think so much. However, there's another reason. It's because the corn is still very hot. Don't use your hands to grab it. You'll get burned. After being cooked and braised for a while, the corn was indeed very beautiful. It was a little white before, but now it looked golden. How could such beautiful corn be very hot? I'll try. I'll just touch it carefully. I don't want to eat it. Lon Exayan was a little reluctant and begged in a low voice. Then touch it carefully and see if it's very hot. Yang Yi did not object. Lon Exayan carefully stretched out her small hand and touched the surface of the corn with her index finger. Suddenly, the little fat girl's eyes widened, and she retracted her small hand like lightning. It's really very hot. Shishi, try it if you don't believe me. Lon Exayan said to her little friend in amazement. Shishi smiled with her eyes curved, as beautiful as the crescent moon. She shook her head and said with a smile, I don't want it. I know it's very hot. It's just cooked. However, after about 10 minutes, the corn in the courtyard had already cooled down. The two little girls couldn't wait to grab a corn each and walk around the courtyard, gnawing on it. Yummy! Lon Exayan exclaimed happily. She ate a little happily. After some corn was bitten, it leaked out from the corner of her mouth and fell to the ground. Immediately, a little hen, who was already thinking about the two girls feeding the chickens, stretched her neck, arched her butt, and rushed over like a fighter jet. She pecked the ground, and then like a frightened bird, she slipped away after eating. The corn cobs were very big. A corn was almost as long as Tong Tong's arm. The sisters easily grabbed and ate, but Tong Tong was a little bit unable to hold it. Moreover, he was a little greedy and picked a very thick and long corn. Sister, help me, okay? The little guy struggled to hold his corn, came to Shishi's side, pouted his little mouth, and said in a childish voice, okay. He even said wrong. Shishi, of course, wanted to help her brother. She put her corn back on the plate, and then took her brother's corn. Shishi had seen how her father used to do it. She struggled to break the corn. She couldn't use her strength. Thus, the little girl sat down on a small stool at the side. The little girl's skirt slid down, revealing her white knees. Sisi needed a fulcrum like this. She learned from her father's previous practice and placed the corn on her knees, pressing down hard on both sides. Fortunately, this corn was a little long and tender. Moreover, Shishi had a lot of strength. She held her little face until it was red. She used all her strength and finally broke the corn into two. Here. Shishi handed one half to Tong Tong. Tong Tong happily held it. This time, he was much more relaxed. He couldn't wait to take a bite. It was sweet, soft, and super delicious. Ehe. The little guy chewed and laughed happily with his sister. His sister was still the best. Shishi was relieved. She put the remaining half of the corn on the plate, then picked up the corn that she had already eaten a little and said, Brother, I'll put it here for you. You can eat it later. Chapter 1189. At noon, Tong Tong had already gone to bed. Shishi and Lon Exayan were still happily sitting on the floor of the room on the third floor, playing the cards that the other children in the village had taught them today. Although there were only two of them, and the two girls were confused and had their own understandings. They played and argued with each other, but the two of them were still very engrossed in playing. However, Shishi suddenly pricked up her ears. She seemed to have heard her father calling her, Papa. Shishi curiously turned her head and looked around. Then she stood up and ran to open the door. There was an air conditioner in the room, so it was cool. Now that she opened the door, she suddenly felt like she was in a different world. The billowing heat outside swept in. Lon Exayan, who was following behind, shouted, Wow! It's so hot. However, Shishi's intuition was right. Her father was calling them from downstairs. The little girl stuck her little head out and called crisply, Papa! Yang Yi waved to them downstairs, then pointed to the bamboo bed and bamboo chair under the shade of the tree. He had just taken a lot of effort to move them out of the house. He smiled and said, Shishi, Exayan, come down. This afternoon, we'll rest in the yard under the shade of the tree and feel the cool breeze of nature. Look, there's also a bamboo bed. It's very comfortable. Playing with Papa downstairs? Of course. Shishi happily responded and said, Okay. I'll go down with Xian Air. Shishi was very supportive, but Lan Xian was not. She summoned her courage and came out to take a look under the heat. She pouted and said reluctantly, "No, I don't want to go down. It's so hot down there." "No, there's also shade down there." Yang Yi laughed and said, "Although it's not as comfortable as the air conditioner, we can experience the cool natural breeze." "I don't want to, I don't want to, I don't want to be so hot. I want to enjoy the air conditioner." Lan Xian shook her head fiercely. She yelled and ran back to the room, as if she was afraid that Father Yang would come up and arrest her. Back in the room, Lan Xian felt much more comfortable under the air conditioner as the temperature dropped sharply. The chubby girl narrowed her eyes proudly. "I don't want to go outside. The sun is so hot, I'll be roasted like a little suckling pig." However, Shishi wanted to experience the new things that her father had mentioned. She scratched her head awkwardly and asked, "Xianer, aren't you going down?" "I want to go down. I haven't slept on the bamboo bed Papa mentioned yet." "Then go. I'm upstairs sleeping with Mother Mo and Tong Tong." Lan Xian said nonchalantly. There was no other way. He couldn't persuade Lan Xian, who was afraid of the heat. She only wanted to come down alone. She didn't let her father's efforts go to waste. Yang Yi spent a lot of effort cleaning the courtyard this morning, so that he could sit comfortably under the shade of the trees. Otherwise, with Yang Yi's character, it would be better to kill him than to let him be neighbors with those chickens and ducks and smell the faintly discernible stench floating on the ground. "Come here. Don't stand under the sun." Yang Yi lay comfortably on the bamboo recliner and waved at Shishi with a smile. Yang Chonggui had asked the craftsman in the village to help make this bamboo recliner. It was not as small and delicate as the ones sold on the market. There was nothing new about its style, but it was very big and sturdy. With Yang Yi's tall and sturdy body, there was no creaking sound when he slept on it. With his long legs, he could easily rest them on the legs of the bamboo recliner. When Cece came over, Steamed Bun, who was resting under the shade of the tree, was overjoyed. He wagged his tail and greeted his little master, then followed behind her. Unfortunately, his little master didn't come to play with him. "Papa, it's very hot outside. That's why Xian Air doesn't want to come down." Under her father's guidance, Shishi climbed onto the polished bamboo bed, sat cross-legged, and smiled at her father a little condescendingly. "That's because she's not lucky." Yang Yi shrugged his shoulders and said carelessly, "You just came out from under the sun, so of course you're still tired. After a while, you'll feel cool and refreshed." "This bed is very cool." Shishi touched it curiously. "Shishi, come, do this with me." Yang Yi snapped his fingers and smiled at his daughter. He put down the back of the bamboo recliner and stretched comfortably. He hummed and said, "Lie down and close your eyes. Let's use our ears and the skin on your face to quietly feel the cool breeze of nature under the shade of the trees." Shishi lay down on the bamboo bed obediently. However, the little girl's head was resting on the pillow stuffed with cassia seeds. She turned her body sideways and blinked her big bright eyes. After looking at her father, she continued to imitate her father's posture. Facing the dense shade of the trees, she closed her eyes comfortably. There were several big trees in the courtyard at home. The one they were resting on now had a history of several decades. The canopy was like an umbrella, forming a gorgeous green curtain. The blazing noon sun couldn't penetrate the layers of leaves. Therefore, she closed her eyes and only felt that the light outside her eyelids was very soft, similar to the light inside the house. After closing her eyes, the world seemed to have become quiet. Cece felt the gentle breeze that her father had mentioned. Although it was still a little hot at first, when the breeze brushed past her body, the fine hair on the little girl's face was brushed, and her sweat evaporated. A cool and refreshing feeling slowly brewed. Do you feel it? The wind of nature is very fresh, very gentle, and very cool. Is it more comfortable than the air conditioner? Yang Yi asked with a smile. Shishi's long eyelashes trembled, and her big bright eyes opened. She giggled, looked sideways at her father and said, "I also feel very comfortable. Papa, why don't we have such a comfortable bed at home? Then we can sleep under the tree." "In Jiang City?" Yang Yi said with a smile. If you like, we can get someone to build a bed like this. But the trees in our courtyard are not so big. If you want to enjoy the shade like this, you may have to wait for a few years. Is that so? Shishi blinked with some regret. It's okay. Now that we have the opportunity, let's feel it more. Yang Yi raised his two arms, put them behind his head comfortably and said softly, this is also a rare opportunity to be in contact with nature, because many times in the big city, we have to face those air conditioners, machines, and a very busy life. Now, it's very difficult to quietly listen to the sound of the wind and enjoy the coolness of summer without much noise. In the midst of her father's emotional long speech, Shishi was lying on the bamboo bed. She casually crossed her legs and smiled with her eyes curved. Her small hands were raised high, as if she was catching the breeze, and also as if she was reaching for the tall, dense leaves. She and her father were here, quietly bathing in the natural breeze, and she was very happy. However, Shishi's little head was not like her father's, who always thought of many comparisons and many complicated emotions. She turned around on the bamboo bed, and then giggled. She turned sideways and called her father, who seemed to be about to fall asleep. Papa, Papa, do you know what I was thinking just now? What were you thinking? Yang Yi did not open his eyes. Listening to his daughter's sweet voice, the corners of his mouth slightly raised and asked, Papa, let me tell you, it's such a big tree. I was wondering if there would be a little squirrel jumping around on it. Then it might also be looking at me, waiting for me to sleep, and then come out, not letting me see it. Hee. It's too bad. The little girl said naively. Yang Yi listened to Shishi's imaginative narration. Originally, he wanted to laugh and explain to the little girl that it was impossible for there to be a little squirrel here. However, Yang Yi's heart suddenly moved, because from Shishi's description, a very famous cartoon appeared in his mind. Shishi, Papa will tell you a very interesting story, okay? Yang Yi smiled and said softly, Okay. I like Papa's stories. Shishi responded happily. She turned sideways, opened her big eyes, and looked at her father with joy. Chapter 1190. In order to make it easier for him to tell the story, Yang Yi also sat on the bamboo bed. Cece immediately came over and giggled as she pulled on her father's sturdy calf and rested her head on it comfortably, as if her father's hairy leg was more comfortable than a pillow. Aren't you afraid of the stench? Daddy's foot. Yang Yi smiled, reached out and rubbed the little girl's head and asked, No. Papa's feet are as clean as mine. Look. Cece said with a complacent smile as she lay on her back and even crossed her legs with one of her white and tender little feet. Of course, the little girl's dependence on her father was very good. Yang Yi gently stroked Shishi's little head, said a few words to her, and then smiled and began to tell the story. A long time ago, there was an elder sister called Xiaoyu, and she had a very cute younger sister called Xiaomei. Yang Yi said gently. Shishi curiously looked back at her father and asked, Papa, why not have a younger brother? This way, it can be me and my younger brother. This is just a story. Yang Yi gently shook his head and said with a smile, Do you want to be the elder sister yourself, and then let your younger brother join the story? Shishi was a little embarrassed. She covered her little face with her hands, twisted her little butt, and rolled around like a piece of wood, and said with a smile, Anything is fine. A girl's words were unfathomable, and certainly could not be understood from the literal meaning. As Shishi said, anything was fine, but in fact it meant that she wanted it. Okay then. Yang Yi decided to improvise. A long time ago, there was a beautiful and sensible elder sister called Xiaoxi, and then she had a lively and cute younger brother called Xiao Yan. Let's do it like this, okay? Shishi's bell-like laughter echoed in the courtyard. After she finished laughing, she shyly whispered, Hee Papa, I am a beautiful and sensible elder sister. The story continued. Because Xiaoxi's mother fell ill and needed to recuperate in a beautiful suburban hospital, Xiaoxi's father decided to move back to the countryside, which is closer to the hospital. This way, he can work, take care of the two children, and visit Xiaoxi's mother frequently. Yang Yi said softly. Shishi sat up anxiously. The little girl's eyebrows drooped slightly as she said worriedly, Is Xiaoxi's mom sick? It's okay, don't worry. As long as she quietly recuperates, Xiaoxi's mother will recover. Yang Yi comforted her softly. Besides, Daddy said that this is just a story. It's not real. Shishi, Mommy and Daddy are not in it. They are just characters in the story. Shishi snuggled up to her father and lay down. She was half lying in her father's arms, hugging her father's hand and listening quietly. They lived in an old house in the countryside. No one had lived in it for a long time, so when they moved back, Xiaoxi took Mommy and worked hard to clean the house together with Daddy. Yang Yi saw Shishi's doubtful gaze and explained with a smile. By the way, in this story, Mommy is already 3 or 4 years old. Xiaoxi, of course, is older than you are now. If little brother is 3 or 4 years old, then I'm 8 years old. Shishi was good at math. She quickly figured it out and said briskly. That's right, Shishi is really amazing. You figured it out so quickly. Because Xiaoxi and Mommy in the story have grown up and are very sensible, they are very diligent in helping Daddy clean the house. Yang Yi smiled and praised the little girl. He then said, when they were cleaning, Mommy found a very magical dust fairy. Dust fairy? Shishi looked at her father in surprise. So this is a fairy tale. The little girl's interest was even stronger. Fortunately, when he was about to tell the story, Yang Yi went to the back room and took out a pencil and a stack of calendar paper. Although the equipment was not good, under Yang Yi's skillful hand, a black dust fairy with 2 big eyes and many thorns jumped out of the paper. Hey, Papa, I think it looks very familiar. Shishi blinked her big eyes and looked at it while making a puzzled sound. Yang Yi said with a smile, is it very similar to the Hongmao pill that Uncle Fu Jun sent us when we were at home? This was not long ago. Shishi's eyes lit up and she said in surprise, yes, it is very similar to that thing. And the Hongmao pill is very delicious. He still had to tell the story. Shishi was full of affection for this dust fairy. When she learned that Mommy caught a dust fairy and the dust fairy slipped away, leaving Mommy's hands and feet covered with black coal stains, Shishi felt that it was very funny and giggled for a long time. Of course, the most touching role was yet to come. Soon, Yang Yi told the story of Xiaoxi going to school, her father working at the desk, and Mommy playing in the yard was attracted by 2 little chinchillas. Chinchillas? Shishi leaned over to her father and looked at the 2 little chinchillas that her father had drawn. Yang Yi did not stop. He drew and talked at the same time. He talked about how Mommy followed the 2 little chinchillas into a tree hole interwoven with bushes. Shishi listened very attentively. At this time, she forgot to recognize the plot. Was it a bit familiar? Wasn't it? Wasn't this plot very similar to the story of Alice in Wonderland that her father had told her before? But Shishi's attention was on the 2 cute little chinchillas. Soon, in her father's vivid description, Mommy slid into a huge tree hole and found a fluffy, super big chinchilla. That chinchilla was as big as a fat car, but it was sleeping, so Mommy climbed up along its soft and fat tail like a little squirrel. Yang Yi said as he carefully drew the big chinchilla and used the shadow effect. Soon, a round chinchilla that looked a bit like a ding-dang appeared on the paper. Cece immediately fell in love with its white belly with 2 rows of crescent-shaped fur. Although she was already a little sleepy and wanted to take a nap, she still couldn't help but cry out in joy. Wow, so cute! Papa, it looks like a fat cat with a beard. That's why it's called a chinchilla. Mommy also thinks it's very cute, especially when it's sleeping, just like when he was a child lying on his father's belly. It's very fun. So the naughty Mommy lay on the big chinchilla's fat belly, rubbed its belly, and reached out to touch the big chinchilla's nose. Yang Yi laughed and said, the big chinchilla is very interesting. When its nose is touched, it will feel itchy and sneeze, and then its super big mouth will open. In order to describe it more vividly, Yang Yi drew the big chinchilla's mouth on the almanac while he opened his big mouth and showed it to Shishi. When Shishi saw her father open his mouth, she couldn't help yawning. She was really sleepy, but at this time the little girl couldn't help but ask worriedly, will the big chinchilla eat my brother? Its mouth is so big. No, the big chinchilla is a good person, a good elf. It is the guardian of the forest. Although it is a little big and has terrible claws, its heart is very kind. Of course, It will like such a cute and lively child like Mommy very much. Young-yi laughed. In the story, Mommy fell asleep on the belly of the big chinchilla. She also couldn't resist the sleepiness of the afternoon nap. In her father's arms, she was coaxed by him and fell asleep. Of course, the story was not finished yet. But she believed that in the process of taking a comfortable afternoon nap under the shade of the tree, her dream must be very wonderful. Because there may not be a little squirrel on the tree, but there was a simple and cute big chinchilla. Chapter 1191. During the day, Young-yi told Shishi the story of Totoro. At night, the little girl ran to her parents' room and danced on the bed. She retold her favorite story to Tong Tong, Lon Xian, and her mother. When I saw Totoro for the first time, I was scared by him, the little girl said in a narrative tone, as if she had been there. She said excitedly, he was so big, so fat, and much taller than my father. But he was still very cute. When I lent him an umbrella, Totoro lifted it up because the lotus leaf on his head was too small. And he really liked the sound of the rain falling. And the super big Totoro bus. The little girl put her two small hands in front of her eyes and smiled. She said, he had two big eyes that could shine just like my father's car lights. This fantasy of Totoro accompanied Shishi for the last few days of the summer vacation. At her grandparents' house, she often pulled Tong Tong, pointed at the tree, and asked expectantly, little brother, do you see Totoro on the tree? Tong Tong didn't understand what his sister was asking. He foolishly followed his sister's finger, and looked in a daze for a long time. In the end, the two of them could only see birds perching, birds flying, and the sun rising and setting. It was a pity that the chubby Totoro didn't appear in their sight. Happy times were always short. As the summer vacation was coming to an end, Shishi and Lon Xian had to say goodbye to their grandparents and go back to Jiangqing with their father. They were going to usher in a brand new school year. However, the two girls still gained something from this trip home. On the way back, Shishi and Lon Xian couldn't help but move their little butts around on the third row of seats. They even secretly unfastened their seatbelts. Shishi, what are you doing? Buckle your seatbelt. It's dangerous. Murphy saw that the two girls had already climbed up and were kneeling on the cushions. They stuck their little butts out and looked into the trunk. She hurriedly stopped them and scolded them. Shishi and Lon Xian were like naughty kids who had been caught doing bad things. They giggled to cover up their shyness. Shishi whispered, we are looking at Chick. We are afraid that it will die. It turned out that when Grandma saw that her granddaughter liked to feed those chicks, she arranged for her granddaughter to catch 2 chicks for Shishi to raise when she returned home. It was worth mentioning that the batch of chicks that Shishi fed before was actually not small. Dong Yue was more meticulous. She specially found chicks that had not been hatched for too long in the village, and put them in a cardboard box. She asked Yang Yi to bring them home for Shishi. Yang Yi looked at Shishi's expectant eyes. He thought about it and did not refuse, because he remembered how sad Shishi was when Xiaoyu returned to nature. It was much better to raise chicks. The chicks would not fly away. He did not have to worry about Shishi facing the sad scene of saying goodbye to chicks again. Moreover, as long as the method was right, they were easier to raise, so Yang Yi agreed. Don't ask if these chicks would stink in the car? Who didn't have a lot of local specialties stuffed in their car when they came back from their hometown? Not to mention the chicks, because the car Yang Yi drove back this time was relatively large. The rear compartment was filled to the brim. 3 live hens and roosters were packed in woven bags and stuffed in the rear compartment. The old lady said that the free-range chickens in the village were delicious. She asked Yang Yi to bring them up to nourish the children's bodies, so she had to endure it for the time being. But Cici and Lon Xian didn't care about this at all. They had been so excited by the cute chicks that they were moving around excitedly all the way. That was why Mofe caught them being disobedient just now. They won't die. Steamed Bun is watching in the back. Yang Yi drove, looked at the rearview mirror, and said softly, and Daddy will stop at the service station in a while. When the time comes, just open the door and let them breathe. Okay. Shishi responded obediently. Steamed Bun, who also went back with its master to visit relatives, was indeed locked in the trunk. It felt very wronged. Big Master and Little Master did not play with it along the way. They even made it accompany so many long-feathered, pointy-mouthed monsters. Maybe it had also suffered a loss. It did not know when, but in the beginning, it chased the chickens and ducks in the yard and jumped up and down. Later, it suddenly did not dare to. It was probably because the rooster fought back when the people were not there. Now Steamed Bun was scared. It shrunk its head and lay in a corner, trying to avoid those pointy-mouthed monsters. It only stole a few glances, but its eyes were full of grievance, as if the masters had mistreated it. Papa, I think it's super good to raise chickens at home, because in this way, there won't be any roosters to snatch the chickens' food, Shishi said, beaming with joy. Before Yang Yi could reply, Lan Xian questioned, Shishi, that's not right. Aren't there still roosters behind? That's not it. Grandma said that those big roosters and big hens are for us to eat. They won't fight over food with the little chicks. Cece pouted her little mouth as she spoke. She was still a little uncertain. She raised her little head and asked her father, right, Papa? Yang Yi smiled and said, well, they won't have a chance to snatch the chickens' food. See, I didn't remember wrongly, did I? Cece said happily to Lan Xian. Then I still want to eat. I think Shishi, the chicken soup in your grandma's house is super delicious. Lan Xian couldn't help but lick her lips with her little tongue and said, Then I also ate a chicken leg. It was very delicious, very delicious. However, she seemed to think of something and asked Yang Yi nervously, Dad Yang, after I go back, can I still go to your house to eat? Your family's chicken is really tasty. Even our house doesn't have such delicious chicken. At this moment, Yang Yi was busy driving, so Murphy took the initiative to say, of course, Xian, as long as you want to come over to eat, you can come over at any time. We definitely won't miss out on a pair of chopsticks. Murphy said generously, and Yang Yi also added with a smile. Xian, not only can you come to our house to eat, but I've brought so many chickens back this time. When the time comes, I'll bring one back for Uncle Gua, and ask your mother to bring one back to cook soup for you. You don't have to bring it back. Hee, I'll just stay at your house and eat with Shishi. Lan Xian smiled contentedly, took Shishi's hand, and said, because Dad Yang's cooking is super delicious, I like to eat at your house. It would be great if only Mom Emo had promised just now. Lan Xian was very nervous just now, thinking that the good days of free eating and drinking were over. Shishi also laughed with her friends. She narrowed her eyes happily and said, Papa, you can make that salt-baked chicken. I think it's also very delicious. Yes, there's soy sauce chicken, salt crispy chicken. Wow, Shishi, I can think of many ways to eat it. Lan Xian and Shishi chatted in the back again. Chapter 1192. On the first day back home, Shishi was busy settling the chicks down. She wanted to find a small quilt to make a nest for the chicks, and she also wanted to find rice for the chicks to eat. She was afraid that they would be hungry. After Yang Yi knew about it, he didn't know whether to laugh or cry and stopped the little girl who was in high spirits. She also said worriedly, Papa, but if you don't make a comfortable nest for them, will they feel uncomfortable? Because they are so small. Chicks live in a different environment from us humans. They have feathers, and they are not as bald as when Xiao Xiao was a child. It's easy to catch a cold. Yang Yi explained with a smile. If you make the nest too good, they won't be used to it. And in such hot weather, if you cover them with a quilt, they will be suffocated. Shishi looked at her father in surprise and quickly put the small quilt in her hand aside. Then she asked in confusion, But Papa, what should we do? Yang Yi took out the big cage that he had bought for Xiaoya from the storage room. He first spread a few layers of newspaper inside and said with a smile, Let them live in the cage for the next 2 days. After they are familiar with the environment, let them out for a walk. And it's easier to take care of them living in the cage. They are similar to Xiaoya, and they often have stinky diarrhea. Well, Shishi whispered, hugging her knees and squatting on the side to watch her father help her move the 2 chicks. Shishi was still worried if she didn't watch. In fact, the cardboard box was already a little smelly. When Yang Yi caught the 2 chicks, he had to clean up the 2 little guys before putting them into the cage. As for the cardboard box, of course, he had to throw it away. Moreover, Yang didn't want to leave it at home. Smelly. Yang held his breath and took the cardboard box to the community garbage disposal center outside to throw it away. He muttered helplessly in his heart. To be honest, when Shishi raised chicks at home, Yang refused in his heart. He always felt that these things were dirty and smelly. But who asked Yang to be used to giving in step by step in the past few years? Ever since Yang had started raising cats, Xiao Guai and the other cats that would shed their fur had already given Yang a headache. Later on, he had steamed bun. Faced with these little fellows that would often make everything dirty in the house, Yang Yi's heart had already become like stagnant water. Daddy, daddy. When Yang Yi returned to the courtyard, Shishi couldn't wait to jump up and run to his side. Holding his hand, she reported, "The chicks are very cute. They will run around in the cage, and then come over to peck my hand. That's because they are hungry. The millet we fed them along the way has been eaten up by them," Yang Yi said with a smile. After such a long time, they are probably hungry. Seeing his daughter so excited, Yang Yi was relieved. At most, he would be more diligent and often help Shishi change the newspapers for the two chicks and clean the cages. Of course, the chicks still had to be raised in the yard. After all, the smell was still a bit strong. As for the usual hygiene, Yang Yi had already told Shishi and Lan Xian when he was in his hometown. Now Shishi also understood that after touching the chicks, she had to go back and get soap to wash her hands. As for the food that the chicks ate, Yang Yi couldn't let Shishi feed them with rice grains anymore. After all, the chicks in his hometown had grown up and could eat raw rice grains, but the two chicks in their house were still too young. Therefore, Yang Yi took Shishi to the kitchen. Now they can only eat millet. When they grow up, they can eat the rice that we usually eat, or small bread, cabbage, or the little worms that Xiaoya liked to eat before. When they grow up, they can also eat them. But now they still need to eat some fine food. As Yang Yi said, he took the millet, put it in a bowl, and soaked it in warm water. Wait a while. After soaking it for half an hour, you can feed it to them. Papa, do we also need to feed the chicks water to drink? Shishi remembered very clearly that when she used to take care of Xiaoya, she often had to feed Xiaoya water to drink. Well, they need to drink water. Let's pour away some of the water later and leave some, so that the chicks can also replenish some water, Yang Yi said with a smile. But you can't feed them too much water, because if the chicks drink too much water, they will have diarrhea. Shishi nodded her little head nervously. The expression on her little face was very focused. She looked at her father closely, as if she wanted to remember these details of her father. In the future, she would need to take care of the chicks. After her father moved the two chicks, the little girl couldn't wait to run to the side hall. Xiao Guai, Xiao Hui, Tut, come here, come here. Shishi happily waved at the three fat cats who had just returned from Lan Xian's house and were patrolling their cat nest. I'll introduce you to two new friends. Xiao Guai and Xiao Hui turned their heads and looked over in confusion, not knowing what the little master was going to do. Tut was more obedient. It jumped down from the cat tree and went to the little master's side. It affectionately rubbed the little master's feet with the fur on its back. Hee, Tut is so obedient. Cece had learned how to coax cats from her father a long time ago. She took out their snacks with ease and rewarded Dodo with a small snack. When Xiao Guai and Xiao Hui saw it, they were suddenly very hungry. They ran from the side and went to the little master's side. Shishi tempted the three fat cats with cat snacks and then brought them to the yard. She squatted next to the two little yellow chicks' cage and introduced them in a clear voice. Xiao Guai, Xiao Hui, Tut, listen to me. They are your new friends, and then they are also my new friends. You can't bully your new friends. The three fat cats looked at the two weak chicks and suddenly lost interest. Xiao Hui went to the little master's side, stretched out a paw, and pressed on the little master's knee. It looked at the little master's little hand, then raised its head and looked at the little master with its seemingly innocent eyes. It gently opened its mouth and said, "Meow." Shishi just rubbed Xiao Hui's head with her left hand, then pointed at Xiao Guai and said angrily, "Especially Xiao Guai. You really can't bully it just like Xiaoya. You see, Xiaoya doesn't dare to come to our house to play anymore. You really can't. I'll be angry. Xiao Guai sensed that something was wrong, but for the sake of food, it still put on a brave front and rolled around Cece in an attempt to please her. It wriggled here and there like a spoiled child. Its flattery was even more shameless than Little Gray and Dodo. But Shishi believed it. She smiled and said, "That's right. You're still a good Xiao Guai." Satisfied, Shishi happily gave the 3 fat cats a snack each. Xiao Guai and the others all started eating, not even looking at the chicks. Of course, Yang Yi was still a cautious person. Although so many people had no problems raising chickens, Yang Yi didn't dare to let his guard down. For the health of his family, he took the chicks to the pet hospital for a checkup the next day. It was worth mentioning that a lot of people in the city were willing to let their children raise chicks for observation, so the pet hospital also had veterinarians who specialized in treating chicks. In addition to doing quarantine for the chicks, Yang Yi also consulted the veterinarian about some things to pay attention to when raising chicks. Although the 2 chicks were quite healthy and lively, Yang Yi still had to know what kind of situation the chicks were in. He had to prepare in advance. Otherwise, if the chicks accidentally died in the future, Shishi would be very sad. Shishi took care of the chicks at home for a few days. Before her interest died down, the little girl's vacation was over. The 2nd grade, Shishi was about to start school again. Chapter 1193. The new semester was about to start. Yang Yi thought that the little girl would be reluctant to go to school because she was reluctant to leave Little Chick, who she had been visiting for the past few days. She would also be reluctant to leave Little Chick, who was free to have fun during the holidays. However, Yang Yi was wrong. The one who was unwilling to go to school was Lan Xian. The chubby girl had finally returned home, and was able to sleep in for 2 days. How could she be willing to be woken up so early? It was said that Wu Jingjing was so angry that she took out a feather duster to wake her up. Of course, she was just trying to scare her. How could she bear to hit her? In comparison, she was a model student. After a few days of interaction, the little girl's passion for Little Chick had decreased a lot. Moreover, Shishi missed her little friend whom she had not seen for a month. Therefore, Shishi was very enthusiastic about going to school. In the morning, as usual, she came back from exercising with her father. The energetic little girl did not need her father to remind her. She washed up and changed into a clean school uniform. She did not even need to eat breakfast. She could not wait to carry her small school bag. However, when she was about to leave, Tong Tong rushed forward and hugged his sister. Tong Tong was only a few months away from 2 years old. The little guy was getting more and more mature. When he heard from his mother that his sister was going to school, Tong Tong knew that his sister could not play with him at home. Therefore, when he saw his sister leaving with her school bag, Tong Tong blocked her way. "I want sister." Tong Tong hugged his sister's school uniform skirt and sobbed sadly. "Sister will come back after school in the afternoon. Sister will play with you at night, okay?" Yang Yi and Murphy squatted down to comfort him. Yang Yi helplessly patted the little guy's head and said softly, "If you don't go to school with me, the teacher will scold your sister." However, this kind of persuasion might work on Shishi, but it was completely ineffective on Tong Tong. How could the little guy know what a teacher was? He was in a bad mood when he thought about how his sister would not be at home, without his sister to play with him. It was just like how other children didn't want their mothers to go to work. Tong Tong's heart was filled with sorrow. She opened her mouth and started crying. Shishi was also trying to persuade her brother softly, but she realized that her brother was not listening to her, and was crying even harder. The little girl could only hug her brother's little head, and look at her father anxiously and helplessly. Murphy sighed and whispered to Yang Yi, "Take Shishi to school. It's okay. I'll coax her at home. He'll probably stop crying after a while." In fact, this was the only way. Shishi was reasonable because she had grown up and was more sensible. She could listen to her father's slow analysis. But Tong Tong didn't work. Not to mention that trying to reason with the little fellow was like talking to a chicken with a duck. Even if he could understand, little Wanwan wouldn't be willing to listen. Children at this age could not control their emotions, and would throw tantrums. They would not listen to anything you said. Therefore, Yang Yi nodded to Murphy and said with a wry smile, "Then I'll trouble you to coax him at home. Try not to scold him. If there's anything, we can talk about it slowly. At worst, let him cry to his heart's content. You can watch from the side. I think he'll be fine after a while." "Sister, you'll be late if you don't go to school now. Okay, don't cry at home. Listen to your mother and wait for sister to come back to play with you in the evening. Do you hear me?" Yang Yi picked up Tong Tong and handed him to Murphy. He hurriedly left with Xi. Behind them, Tong Tong stretched out his little hands and cried heartbreakingly. It was like a melodramatic drama. "Papa, why is my brother crying?" After they got into the car, Yang Yi took Xi to pick up Lan Xian. Xi looked at the house worriedly. Tong Tong's cries could be heard from outside the car window. "Because he doesn't want you to leave. He likes you to play with him," Yang Yi said with a smile. Xi understood the reason, but she could not figure out the reason for this change. Therefore, the little girl asked confusedly, "But Papa, my brother didn't cry before. When I was in school, my brother was very obedient." Yang Yi laughed heartily and said, "What can we do? Papa wants to praise you. You're so good to your brother. He likes to play with you very much, just like you liked to play with Papa in the past. Now that he's grown up, he gradually understands your importance. That's why he cries now." My brother likes to play with me?" Xi was quite happy to hear her father's explanation. It was a very pleasant thing to be relied on. In this way, Xi was even more eager to think about her brother. After she laughed, she became depressed again. "But my brother is crying. He's so sad. Papa, what should we do?" "It doesn't matter. Your mother is at home. She'll look after him." Yang Yi parked the car in front of Lan Xian's yard. He pressed the horn, turned around, and comforted her with a smile. "Moreover, your brother is a boy. Boys can't be spoiled. Sometimes, let him suffer some setbacks so that he will be stronger in the future. How can he cry for everything? Have you ever seen Papa cry?" Xi was amused by her father's words. She giggled and shook her head. However, when Lan Xian came out, Xi thought of another way. The little girl's eyes suddenly lit up. She pulled the seatbelt, lifted herself up, and hugged the front passenger seat. She said to her father, "Papa, I know. We can let my brother go to school with me. Then he won't cry." Just like in the story of Totoro, when my brother and I went to school together. That's Xiaoxi and Xiaosu. Yang Yi smiled and said, "This method won't work, because in the story, Xiaosu went to sit in his sister's classroom to study because his father and mother were not at home. This can only be done because there is no other way." A stopgap measure? Xi had never heard of this word. Yes, but do you remember? Xiaosu was disobedient in the classroom and affected the other students in class. Yang Yi said softly, "Do you want your brother to go to the classroom and make noise, and then the teacher will blame you?" Xi shrank her head and said with a smile, Then forget it. You can't make trouble in class. You have to listen carefully in class. You are a good student." Cici was still thinking about her good student's card. After sending Xi and Lan Xian to school, Yang Yi went home. Sure enough, as Mo Fei had said before, after little Momo cried for a while, as long as he was not allowed to do anything, he would soon give up. When Yang Yi came back, the little guy had stopped crying. His tears had been wiped away by his mother, but he was still a little unhappy. He pouted and sat in the living room angrily playing with his toys. "This afternoon, let's go to Xiaoguo's house," Yang Yi said to Murphy with a smile. Although it was said to be a treat, Xiaoguo told me that Mayor Guo wanted to talk to me about the cooperation between Jiang City and Sahara. He wanted to hear my opinion first. "Okay, then I'll change my clothes." Murphy nodded. Murphy went upstairs, and Yang Yi squatted down and teased Tong Tong's chubby little face with a smile. Oh. The little guy was still a little unhappy, thinking that his father had kidnapped his sister. He pouted his little mouth and complained with dissatisfaction. "Okay, you're a man. Don't throw a tantrum. Understand?" Yang Yi warned jokingly, but his voice was very gentle. "Your sister is going to school. She will come back to accompany you at night. Mom and Dad will accompany you. What's wrong with that?" Yang Yi deliberately teased him. If you're still angry, Dad won't take you to play. Let's go to Uncle Guo's house. We can also see Sister Ding Xiang, the Sister Ding Xiang who made delicious cakes for you last time. Tong Tong probably still had a deep impression of those delicious cakes, so when he mentioned Sister Ding Xiang, he could not help but raise his little head in surprise. After the little guy confirmed with his father's eyes, he pouted and hugged his father's arm reluctantly, as if he was begging for reconciliation. Okay. For the sake of Sister Ding Xiang, I won't be angry. Chapter 1194. When Shishi arrived at school, she naturally couldn't help but get close to her friends and chat about her summer vacation. Lan Xian also forgot about the depression and grumpiness she had when she left the house. She happily added to Shishi's story. My grandma gave me 2 chicks. I called one Da Huang and the other one I called Xiao Huang. Listening to Shishi's description, Lu Xiaoyu rested her chin on her hand and listened devoutly at the table on the side. The latter half of Xiaoyu's summer vacation was a bit boring because her family had to go to work, so she could only stay at home and play alone. How could it be as colorful as Shishi's vacation? Lan Xian was still shouting excitedly. Yes. Shishi's 2 chicks were so interesting when they were eating. I didn't even find it that interesting when I was in Shishi's hometown. Wow, Xian Air can even go to Shishi's hometown with her. Lu Xiaoyu's eyes were blooming with splendor. She secretly muttered in her heart that she was simply envious. Yes, yes. Shishi seemed to be singing a duet with Lan Xian. She giggled, raised a small hand, and pinched her fingers together to simulate the appearance of a chicken's beak. However, instead of moving her hands, she was moving her head and imitating it cutely. That's it. They peck and peck. They eat rice so fast. Wow! Her friends exclaimed in admiration one after another. Of course, this small-scale storytelling was not enough to satisfy Shishi's desire to talk. The little girl's favorite time was the afternoon of the first day of school, when Teacher Li Rulin brought them together for a class meeting. After Teacher Li finished talking about the last semester's final summary, as well as the vision for this semester and some work arrangements, such as the reselection of class leaders, an open house for parents in October, etc., it was finally time for everyone to chat together. Alright, there's still some time before school ends. Let's chat now, okay? Li Rulin smiled gently at the children and said, I know that your summer vacation will be interesting. Apart from the troublesome summer homework, there will be many interesting experiences. Who would like to share them with us? While everyone was still giggling and bashful, Shishi had already puffed out her chest and raised her right hand high in excitement. Of course, after she raised her hand, there were still a few children who mustered up the courage to eat the crab. For example, the always active class monitor Chao Ruolin and the mischievous Chen Yuxuan. They all raised their hands one after another. Li Ruolin's gaze fell on Shishi, and then she looked at the other students. She hesitated for a moment, but still smiled and called Shishi's name. Yangshi is the first to raise her hand, so please speak first. The rest of the students can wait. There will be a chance. The teacher called her up to tell a story. Shishi was overjoyed. She pulled her chair and stood up briskly, as if she didn't feel nervous about speaking in front of so many students at all. However, before Shishi could speak, Li Rulin coughed lightly and said, However, before student Yangshi begins to speak, the teacher will first state a rule. Every student, think carefully and choose one thing that you think is the most exciting to share with everyone. You can't tell everyone about the entire holiday, okay? Because if you keep talking, you might not be able to finish talking after school. The other students also want to share. Although Li Rulin smiled gently and said this in front of the entire class, it was obvious that she had made this request because she thought of Cece's power and hurriedly changed the rules. Otherwise, why would she have hesitated for a while before calling Cece, who was the first to raise her hand? But at this time, there were always some boys who were annoying, such as Jiang Chen. He sat in the front and turned around, winked at Shishi, and then laughed. I'm talking about Yangshi. You usually talk too much. Jiang Chen, sit properly. Listen to others carefully and don't whisper to each other. Li Ruolin's face turned red as she scolded him in exasperation. How can you be so nosy? It's dangerous to know so much, understand? A few boys followed Jiang Chen and laughed. After they were stopped by the teacher, they quieted down. However, she was not affected. She didn't pay attention to what was happening outside. Her little face was a little dazed. Because after she heard the teacher's request, she was conflicted. Aya, the teacher said I can only talk about one thing. But I have a lot to talk about. So many fun things. Which one should I pick? Shishi's brain was still very fast. She was very fast, but she was a little depressed. She pouted slightly and said, Then I'll tell you the story of me and my dad at my grandma's house. My papa told me a story. Shishi's dad told a story? The children all looked at Shishi in surprise. At this time many people were interested. After all, after hearing the story of Ding Dang, everyone knew that Shishi's dad was very good at telling stories. Yang Yi took Murphy and Tong Tong to visit Mayor Guo's house. However, he first went to Jiangqing Media University to pick up Ding Xiang and Guozi. Now, because the major universities had already started classes, the public welfare activities in Guangdong province had come to an end. Only a group of paid employees, who were originally transferred from the eBay online shopping mall, were still stationed at the contact points of various villages, continuing to provide some consulting services to the villagers. Of course, it was worth mentioning that these employees were also working hard to learn some of the information provided by the Sahara Group. They were working hard to improve their skills, so that they could stand out in the next internal examination and selection of the Sahara Group, and join the Sahara online shopping mall as an official employee. After all, the benefits of the Sahara Group were very attractive. Although Ding Xiang had graduated, she still accompanied Guozi back to Jiangqing, because Guozi still had to come back to report and attend classes. Moreover, the audition for the Truman Show that Du Yuanlei had arranged for him was in early September. Therefore, Guozi was also nervously preparing for it. In order to help him through this difficult time, Ding Xiang also stayed by his side, took care of his daily life, and accompanied him to practice the script. If it weren't for Guo Jingyan's request, Guozi probably wouldn't have time to go home for dinner. Don't be nervous, I still believe in your ability. These years, although you're not as lucky as Geng Sha, you've also been diligently honing your acting skills. As Yang Yi drove, he smiled and said to Guozi, who was sitting in the passenger's seat, I can see that you've improved. Compared to Geng Sha, your performance is more versatile. There's no special personal template, so you're more malleable. Therefore, I still think highly of you. Brother Yang, don't worry. Sister Ding Xiang and I have been practicing almost every day in Guangdong province. I'll try my best to impress the director. Guozi also smiled and said to Yang Yi. In the car everyone talked about Guozi and Ding Xiang's matters in Guangdong province. Suddenly Ding Xiang thought of something. She hesitated for a moment, then said softly to Yang Yi, Brother Yang, this time I came back I learned something from Fang Tang, and I also confirmed it with Lu Xiaoshu and Miao Chuan. They were too embarrassed to tell you, but I think it's necessary to report it to you. What's the matter? Did something happen to Xiaoshu and Chuan? Yang Yi asked, a little surprised. Chapter 1195. Yang Yi rarely asked about the development of his artists. Basically, the arrangement of their activities, program operations, and so on were all left to Mo Xiaowan. It could be said that he entrusted professional matters to professionals. It could also be said that Yang Yi was lazy and did not want to spend too much time on the entertainment industry. Of course, Yang Yi still knew about Lu Xiaoshu and Miao Chuan's development. After all, Mo Xiaowan often reported to him. At present, Qianli Chuanshu was still a little famous in the country. It was said that they had many folk music fans who would work hard to support them when they attended some commercial activities. Seeing that the two youths were developing well, Yang Yi did not interfere anymore. He did not want to put too much pressure on them. However, he did not expect that from Ding Xiang, or indirectly from Fang Tang, Yang Yi would know that Lu Xiaoshu and Miao Chuan had been carrying a heavy psychological burden because of these activities and the support of their fans. From what I know, their personalities are indeed like that. They like music and the stage, but they don't like too many commercial activities. However, because of the loud voices of their fans, they have to go. Ding Xiang could not help but glance at Murphy as she spoke. However, she was too embarrassed to say her analogy. Yang Yi came to a realization and said with a smile, "This is very normal. These two guys are actually suitable for singing quietly. It's the same for folk songs. They can't be trained as pop singers." However, I didn't interfere. At that time, I thought that since they had the chance to become popular, why should I stop them? Actually, they didn't think that way. They said that they would rather spend more time on music, just like Teacher Jean. Ding Xiang said with a bitter smile. Then they could have brought it up to Xiaowan or me. Yang Yi laughed. Ding Xiang, you know my temper. Whether it's Xiao Gua, Huan Huan, Xiao Shu, or Ah Chuan, I want to let nature take its course for their development and respect their personal choice. For example, Xiao Gua, whenever you feel that filming is tiring or that filming, the limit challenge, is too time-consuming, you can bring it up. You can arrange it however you want. Why didn't they tell me? Guazi immediately waved his hand and smiled. Don't be like that. I don't feel tired at all. My current working condition is pretty good. No one cared about him. The focus of the conversation was Thousand Mile Creek Tree. Ding Xiang quickly explained to Yang Yi. It's like this. The two of them felt that if they didn't participate in those activities according to the company's arrangements, they would be letting down your cultivation. It's also because Sugar Cube has interacted with them more, so she knows about this situation. Yang Yi gently shook his head and smiled, feeling a little touched. These two fools really. They really treat me as a boss and not as a brother. What did I tell them? Fine. Ding Xiang, help me make an appointment with the two of them later. I'll have a good talk with them at the coffee shop. As for the specific changes, we'll talk about it after we finish talking. Ding Xiang answered happily. When they arrived at Guazi's home, Guazi's mother, Tan Huijian, welcomed them. Gua Zhengyan didn't come back so early. Everyone was drinking tea and chatting in the living room. Knowing that Mother Gua might have already known about her relationship with Guazi, Ding Xiang felt even more uneasy when she faced Mother Gua again. Since she got off the car, she had been standing beside Tan Huijian, trembling a little. Even if Tan Huijian was smiling as usual, Ding Xiang always felt that she was sizing her up. Naturally, Ding Xiang's mood was tense. She didn't dare to interrupt, so she could only silently help Mother Gua make tea. This Min style of making tea was taught to Ding Xiang by Tan Huijian. Seeing that Ding Xiang rushed to do it, Tan Huijian took back her hand as if nothing had happened. She smiled and talked to Murphy about Tong Tong. How old was he when you last saw him? Tan Huijian's eyes were full of love. She smiled and reached out to play with Tong Tong's little face, who was looking at her with his big eyes. She said to Murphy, he can walk now, right? Murphy smiled and said, last year he wasn't even a year old. Now he's 2 months away. Tan Huijian suddenly smiled and said, that time passed quite quickly. I remember that it was the first time I saw you guys in Ding Xiang. I didn't expect that a year would pass in the blink of an eye. Ding Xiang's body stiffened when she heard Mama Gua mention her name. She almost spilled the tea. Yes. Tong Tong, you should call her Grandma. You have to take the initiative to greet your elders, Murphy said gently. Tong Tong blinked his big eyes and looked back at his mother's encouraging eyes. However, he didn't listen to her. Instead, he shook his little head and grabbed his mother's hand anxiously. He pouted his little mouth and said, No, Grandma, I'm not. The little guy denied in a childish voice, which made everyone laugh. Yang Yi smiled and rubbed Tong Tong's head. He explained to Tan Huijian, he came back to our hometown with us and often played with Grandpa and Grandma, so he remembers everything. Tan Huijian looked at Tong Tong's anxious and cute little face and said happily, Good, you're a smart kid. Murphy smiled helplessly and explained to Tong Tong. Then you can call her Grandma Tan. She's different from our grandma. Grandma Tan is Uncle Gua's mom. This long string of explanations made Little Pai confused. The little fellow hugged his mother's hand and looked at his mother with a puzzled expression. His confused look was also extremely cute. Tan Huijian was also at the age where she wanted to hold a grandson. She missed her son's childhood even more, especially when she was fighting a battle of wits and courage with Guizian, who was naughty and didn't like to study. At this moment, Tan Huijian narrowed her eyes and smiled happily. The more she looked at Tong Tong's rosy little face, the more she liked him. For some reason, she seemed to be absent-mindedly looking to the side and glancing at Ding Xiang's belly, who was getting up to serve everyone tea. Of course, Tan Huijian quickly looked away. She smiled and asked Murphy to give Tong Tong a hug. Ding Xiang didn't see it, but a woman's sixth sense was quite sensitive. She couldn't help but stiffen. She seemed to feel that Mrs. Guo was looking at her. Ding Xiang blushed and took the opportunity to take a look at Tan Huijian. She saw that Tan Huijian was holding little Momo and playing with the little fellow happily. Ding Xiang secretly let out a sigh of relief. Then she secretly gestured to Guizi, anxiously indicating that he shouldn't take the initiative to help her. Although Ding Xiang knew that Guizi cared about her and felt warm in her heart, Mrs. Guo was watching. At noon, Yang Yi and Guo Zhengyan didn't talk much, but the progress was fast. Obviously, for more than a month, the practical Mayor Guo had asked his subordinates to do research. He also had a more comprehensive understanding of the Sahara Online Shopping Mall and the new Sahara Taobao Shopping Mall. They had already come up with a preliminary cooperation plan. Guo Zhengyan didn't plan to talk about cooperation directly with Yang Yi. After all, Yang Yi wasn't the CEO of Sahara. He asked Yang Yi to come over because of this relationship. Guo Zhengyan first learned about Sahara's cooperation intention from Yang Yi. Then he wanted to ask Yang Yi for help. The detailed cooperation details were naturally discussed by the government's team and the management of Sahara. It was worth mentioning that after Guo Zhengyan and Yang Yi chatted happily about Sahara, he smiled and said that he wanted to invite Yang Yi and Murphy to be the promotion ambassadors of Jiangqing's tourism culture. Mayor Guo didn't seem to be joking. He even said, "Both of you have a good image and are very influential singers in the entertainment industry. Moreover, both of you are celebrities from Jiangqing. You are the most suitable to represent Jiangqing." This matter hadn't been settled yet. However, after Jiangqing and Sahara's cooperation deepened, Yang Yi and Murphy really accepted the title given by Jiangqing. Of course, this was all in the future. After returning from the Guo family, Yang Yi and Murphy brought along Tong Tong, who had stopped talking about his sister, to pick up Shishi from school. Chapter 1196. Yang Yi and his family left the Guo residence early. At around 4 p.m., Yang Yi's black SUV slowly arrived at the entrance of Huijia Primary School. Usually after school, the temporary parking lot at the entrance of the school would be occupied by all kinds of luxury cars. Even if Yang Yi had to wait for Shishi and the others to come home, he would not be able to get a good spot. He could only park his car at an intersection and walk to pick up his children. However, Yang Yi was in luck today. He originally wanted to take Tong Tong to see his sister's school, but when he arrived at the school entrance, he saw a car preparing to leave. The empty spot was taken by Yang Yi. After parking the car, Yang Yi turned around with a smile. He winked at Tong Tong and said, "Hey, look, this is where your sister goes to school." Tong Tong was sitting in the child safety seat like the little prince. Just now, Murphy was holding a shiny hair clip and playing a game of guess whose hand it is on with the little guy. Tong Tong thought it was very interesting. He played with his mother and laughed with his eyes narrowed into slits. Now that he heard his father mention his sister, Tong Tong immediately opened his big black eyes. His little mouth opened slightly, and his line of sight followed his father's hand. "Sister." Murphy leaned over with one hand on the child safety seat, and the other hand gently pressed on Tong Tong's little shoulder. She said softly, "Yes. Sister is inside, but she won't come out so soon. We still have to wait for half an hour before she comes out of that door." "Sister Xian Air is also here," Yang Yi said with a smile. Tong Tong probably did not understand, or did not listen to his father carefully. He looked out of the car window in a daze. After a while, he still could not see his sister's figure at the entrance. He could not help but look at his father with a doubtful expression. He pouted his little mouth and asked, "Where is sister?" "We still have to wait a while. Look at Dad's watch." Yang Yi smiled, stretched out his hand, and patiently explained to Tong Tong, Look, when this thick and long needle turns from here to here, sis will come out. Tong Tong held his father's hand and stared at it for a long time. Yang Yi had to explain to him twice before the little boy reluctantly let go of his father's hand. However, Yang Yi did not know if the little boy had understood, because it was already a big challenge for Tong Tong, who was not even 2 years old yet. I'll take him down for a walk. They still had to wait for a while. Yang Yi was afraid that Tong Tong would be too bored to wait for his sister to come out, so he told Murphy and got out of the car. He walked around, unfastened Tong Tong's seatbelt, and carried the little guy out of the car. Then I'll wait in the car. Murphy smiled and nodded at Yang Yi. When they got out of the air-conditioned car, it was hot outside, but fortunately, the hottest part of the day had passed. Under the shade of the tree, their skin gradually adapted to the temperature outside, and the cool breeze was quite comfortable. Yang Yi carried Tong Tong and took him to the shops near the school gate. Look, this is the pen that sis uses to study. This is her notebook and this is... Yang Yi took Tong Tong to pass the time in the stationery shop. The lady boss thought that he was going to buy something, so she came over. She could not help but feel disappointed when she heard that he was only going to introduce them one by one. This disappointment was short-lived. Soon the lady boss smiled and said, "Little brother, when you grow up, you should also come to this school to study. This school is very good. When the time comes, you can also come to Auntie's shop to buy stationery." Yang Yi smiled at the lady boss. He realized that the lady boss did not recognize him. She only thought that he was an ordinary parent. After all, as a businessman, how could he have time to chase after celebrities? However, this kind of feeling was quite good. After all, he was supposed to be an ordinary person. Tong Tong was originally holding a pen and looking at it. When he heard someone talking next to him, he looked over in surprise and found that the lady boss was actually talking to him. The little boy was suddenly scared. He turned around and hugged his father's neck in embarrassment. "Why are you so scared? Auntie is talking to you. Call me Auntie." Yang Yi smiled and coaxed the little boy. After leaving the stationery shop, they did not spend much time. Yang Yi wanted to take Tong Tong to the fence around the school. However, as soon as they walked out, Tong Tong could not stay in his father's arms and struggled to get down. After getting down, the little boy pulled his father's hand. "Where are you going?" Yang Yi smiled and followed the little boy to the school gate. However, the electric retractable gate at the school gate was closed, and Xiao Xiaolong stopped in the distance. "Where's my sister?" The little boy muttered in a low voice. "Why hasn't my sister come out after waiting for so long?" Tong Tong pouted and looked at the school gate. Yang Yi pulled Tong Tong to the side of the road and walked around the fence. He smiled and said to Tong Tong, "Wait a little longer. My sister will come out soon." However, it didn't take long for Yang Yi to bring little Momo back to the car. As school was about to end, the cars around the school were getting denser. There were also many motorcycles carrying passengers. For safety's sake, it was better to return to the car. There was a child safety seat in the second row. Tong Tong wanted to move freely, so Yang Yi let him play in the passenger seat. Anyway, the car was parked and he locked the door from the driver's seat. "Papa, Papa." The little boy excitedly stepped on the seat. When he saw his father reach out his hand to protect him, Tong Tong seemed to have thought of something. He smiled and sat down with his father's hand. Tong Tong held his father's hand and began to study his father's watch. His father seemed to have said that wherever the hand pointed, his sister would come back. Tong Tong was quite serious. He frowned and shook his head left and right. He held his father's watch and studied it. Yang Yi and Murphy, who was sitting in the back, looked at each other and smiled. However, they did not disturb Tong Tong's study. They just smiled and looked at the little boy who was studying the watch enthusiastically. School was finally over, and as soon as the door opened, there were already some impatient little boys running wildly. Behind them, there were also many primary school students carrying their school bags, running and skipping. Some were chatting with their classmates, and some were looking left and right. Soon, they found their parents in the crowd waiting outside, and ran over with a face full of surprise. Tong Tong stepped on the seat and pressed his 2 hands on the edge of the car window. He looked at the crowd with rapt attention. Soon, your sister will come out soon. But you have to pay attention, Yang Yi said with a smile. Tong Tong did not care about his father. He stuck his little butt out and looked at the crowd with his big eyes. He did not know how long he had been looking, but he was a little dazed and could not concentrate. Suddenly, Tong Tong heard his mother whisper, "Look, it's your sister." Tong Tong looked over in a daze. Wasn't that right? His sister was tall, so she stood out among the elementary school students. Moreover, it was the first day of school and the first grade students who were anxious to find their parents. While Tong Tong was still trying to identify the person, he saw Lan Xian's sister appear in his line of sight. He could confirm it. It was his sister Shi. Tong Tong, who had been waiting until the end of the world, was overjoyed. He stepped on the passenger seat happily like a puppy. Hee. Sister. Through the car window, Xiao Tianyu couldn't wait to yell at the top of his lungs. His childish voice called out. Then he looked outside expectantly. Unfortunately, the car window was closed, so Shi could not hear him. The little girl was still talking to Lu Xiaoyu excitedly. Oh, Sister Yuer is here too. Chapter 1197. After Shi said goodbye to Lu Xiaoyu, she chased after Lan Xian until they reached her father's car. However, when the car door opened, a small head popped out from the front passenger seat. Tong Tong hugged the seat excitedly and stepped on it with his little feet, as if he had succeeded in playing hide and seek with his sister. He called out in a childish voice, "Hey, my brother is here too, Mom." Shishi's eyes lit up and she shouted happily. When Shishi got into the car, Tong Tong, who had missed his sister for so long, still wanted to sit with her. Yang Yi carried him to the safety seat in the second row. The little boy struggled to get down and stepped on the carpet with his closed feet. He groaned and wanted to walk through the middle aisle to squeeze with his sisters in the third row. Lan Xian found out and shouted, "No, Tong Tong, there's no more space here." Her sister was the best. She had an idea. She giggled, stretched out her hands and said, "Little brother can sit on my lap. I'll hold you. He'll be very heavy." Lan Xian shouted for Shishi's sake. "That's right." Sisi smiled as if she had suddenly realized something. Of course, for safety reasons, Tong Tong was still caught by her father. "Oh no. Be good. Otherwise, I won't play with you anymore." "Yes, little brother, don't cry. Be good." Because of Tong Tong's tantrum, the car was noisy all the way. She couldn't find a chance to talk about her own affairs. When they got home, Murphy helped Shishi take down her small school bag and asked with a smile, "What's new at school today? Why didn't I see you mention it?" Like an athlete hearing the starting gun, Shishi's eyes lit up. She said excitedly to her mom, "Yes, Mom. Let me tell you. In the class meeting just now, our teacher was asking who was going to talk about the most interesting things during the summer vacation. I was the first to raise my hand." As soon as Yang Yi entered the door, Shishi ran over, took his hand and said enthusiastically, "Hee, Papa, come here too." "What are you doing?" Yang Yi smiled and let the little girl pull him to the sofa and sit with Murphy. Then Tong Tong, who was happily dancing and playing with steamed bun, was pulled over by his sister. He sat between his parents with a confused expression on his face. Only then did she continue. The little girl looked a little regretful as she said, "I originally wanted to tell many stories, but the teacher said that I can only tell one story." Yang Yi smiled and asked, "What story did you tell them?" As he spoke, the hand behind Tong Tong's but moved. Yang Yi looked over and saw Murphy looking at him with a smile in her eyes. The two of them exchanged glances. Yang Yi could tell that Murphy seemed to be saying to him, "The teacher is still a sensible person." Yang Yi and Murphy looked at each other and smiled. Shishi did not pay attention to her parents' little movements. With her father's support, she became more excited and said, "I told everyone the story of Totoro that Papa told me." "The story of Totoro?" During the class meeting, can you finish telling everyone? Yang Yi was stunned for a moment. He felt that something was wrong. "I can't finish it." Sisi felt that her father knew her too well, and had spoken her mind. She pouted and said, "After school, I didn't even finish the story. The teacher said that the teacher asked me to continue telling stories to everyone in the future. After that, Xiuyu went home and said that she really wanted to hear me tell stories and wanted to call me. But she was afraid that her papa wouldn't let her. However, the little girl soon became happy again. She smiled and said, "But Papa, let me tell you, everyone likes Totoro very much. They don't want to tell their own stories. They just want to listen to me tell Totoro." Yang Yi smiled. In his heart he could already see Li Ruolin's dumbfounded expression. She said with joy. Later, I said that Xiaoyu saw a big Totoro in a tree hole. Then everyone screamed. The little girl said it vividly. Not only did she open her arms, but her eyes and mouth also showed the admiration and envy of her classmates at that time. For all, Mo Fei held back her laughter, and Yang Yi was also smiling, but little Momo seemed to be very interested. Mo Fei didn't know whether he understood it, or he thought that the change in his sister's expression was very interesting, but he was so happy that he danced with joy. It was as if his sister was giving him a performance. Tong Tong was so happy that people were worried that he would choke on his laughter. "Papa, let me tell you, everyone is so envious of me," she said happily. "Everyone said that your papa is so awesome. The story he tells is so good. Then, everyone said that they want to see Totoro in a tree." Although Yang Yi was already indifferent to praise and humiliation, when he heard Shishi's words and thought of a group of children looking at Shishi with envy, he couldn't help but feel proud. Murphy saw Yang Yi's smug look and said with a smile, "Shishi, look at what you said about Dad. He's a little arrogant and complacent." Yang Yi gently raised his eyebrows and argued, "What do you mean by arrogant and complacent? This is called the eyes of the masses are bright." The child gave a fair evaluation. "Right. Shishi, don't you think Dad is the best?" Shishi said very seriously, "Yes, Papa is the best. They all said that it would be great if you were their Papa. But I won't give my Papa to them." Yang Yi glanced at Murphy proudly. Murphy snorted at him angrily and turned her head away. Although Yang Yi was joking with Murphy, he also understood that the reason why Shishi said so was because the children were really envious. Compared with Yang Yi's gentleness and meticulousness, other fathers had some unsatisfactory aspects in the process of educating their children. Not to mention that some fathers were too busy to pay attention to their children, and left the education of their children to their mothers or grandparents. Even if some fathers were responsible, their methods of educating their children were still lacking, and their attitude was not as patient as Yang Yi. Just like in the story of Chinchilla, if a child ran to his father and said that he saw a big chinchilla in a tree, perhaps many fathers would impatiently reprimand them. "Don't make trouble." Perhaps they would not be so fierce, but they would still explain and tell the children that there was no chinchilla in the world. How many people would think that they should protect the children's precious imagination? How many people would be like the father in the story, who not only did not blame the children, but also took the children to pray under the camphor tree with a smile on their faces, saying thank you to the camphor tree for taking care of Shaoli, of course. Interesting people like Yang Yi also told many interesting stories to children. They used strange fairy tales to make children believe that there were many beautiful things in the world. A father like Yang Yi who was full of stories was even more difficult to find. Shishi was still very lucky. Chapter 1198. Although the mainstream media did not pay much attention to it, most people did not know that Yang Yi had brought many cartoon characters to the world through fairy tales, picture books, comic books, and even through the transmission of cartoons. These characters were already familiar to children, and even some adults who were still childish at heart. Just like Xiongda and Xiong-er from Yang Yi's previous life, or Pleasant Goat. Although they were not as popular as some traditional cartoon characters, in the eyes of the new generation of children, the cartoon characters from stories such as Snowbow, Princess Elsa, Snow White, and Ice Age had already created a beautiful fantasy world for them. For example, the complete comic book Ding Dang that Yang Yi had just released was currently selling like crazy on the market. Many children were repeating the heroic deeds that Shishi's children had done half a year ago, such as shouting memory bread at the textbook or shouting time machine at the drawer. Yang Yi had also made plans to release Totoro as an animated movie in the future. He believed that Teacher Gong's classic works would gradually appear on the big screen. After a certain period of time, Ding Dang, Totoro, and other cartoon characters would become deeply engraved in the minds of children who grew up in Shishi's generation. Naturally, these would also become new classics, and they would continue to be used for a long time. Let's not talk about these for now. The new semester of the second grade student, Shishi, continued happily. As Shishi was very smart and well-behaved, and this little girl was positive and optimistic, there were not many things that her parents needed to worry about. Therefore, Yang Yi and Murphy began to pay more attention to the little girl's psychological state, how she interacted with her classmates at school, and the progress of her studies every day. Gradually, they began to put more effort into Tong Tong's education. After all, Tong Tong was almost 2 years old, and it was time for him to learn some complicated things. For example, Murphy would deliberately use some simple and interesting children's songs or tongue twisters to teach Tong Tong some difficult pronunciations, teach him some new vocabulary, and teach him to speak fluently. As for Yang Yi, he taught him to do things that he should learn to do independently. For example, this morning, after sending Shishi to school, Yang Yi prepared to go to the studio with Murphy to practice a new song. When they were about to go out, Yang Yi brought Tong Tong's little sandals and said to the little girl, who knew that she was going out to play and was already sitting on the small bench in the hall, "Today you can try on the shoes yourself, okay? Daddy heard from elder sister that you are very smart and can do many things by yourself. Daddy also believes that you will definitely be able to wear your shoes well." His father's praise had some effect. Little Huahua took his little shoes and placed them on the ground. He lowered his head to study his shoes as he mumbled in a choked voice, "Huahua is great." He was quick to praise himself, but when it came to wearing shoes, he was still a little lacking. The little boy grabbed a small shoe and struggled to put it on his left foot. It was unknown whether it was a coincidence or not, but little Momo managed to get the right and left sides of the shoes right. However, little Momo was fuming and trying to fit his disobedient feet into the shoes for a long time. However, he was either stuck on one toe or the other, or he was trying to fit his feet into the wrong side holes. Steamed Bun wagged his tail and came over. He stuck out his tongue and stood at the side watching. He seemed to understand that his little master was in trouble, so he twisted his head and tried to bite Tong Tong's little shoe to help him. However, Yang Yi was quick to react and stopped it. Tong Tong was still focused on putting on his little shoe. Yang Yi was impressed that the little boy seemed to have learned from his elder sister's tenacity. Even though he failed a few times, he did not give up. The little boy heaved a sigh of relief. He got down from the stool and sat on a flatter ground before putting on his shoes again. This time, Tong Tong was finally able to move his little feet. After trying twice, the little boy finally managed to put on his shoes. Although the side of the shoe was facing the upper side of the shoe, Tong Tong looked at it and cleverly turned it around and straightened the shoe. Next, of course, Tong Tong had to stick the magic tape on the sandal. This was easy because Yang Yi had thought it through. The magic tape did not buckle, and Tong Tong had seen how his parents helped him put on his shoes. The little boy stuck the magic tape on and was ready to put on his other shoe. "Wait a minute. You haven't tightened the tape." Yang Yi smiled and stretched out his hand to hold the little boy's left foot. He gestured and explained to Tong Tong gently, "Look, Daddy is going to pull the tape on the sandal so that it's tight." Tong Tong's little mouth opened slightly, revealing his moist and rosy lips. He looked at his father's actions and seemed a little silly, cute, and confused. After a while, when Tong Tong was putting on his second shoe, he followed his father's instructions and carefully pulled the magic tape on the sandal. Then he put on his right shoe. "Not bad, not bad." Yang Yi smiled and clapped his hands. He even gestured to Tong Tong. After putting on his shoes, Tong Tong, who had been walking on the floor, looked up and saw the little boy, who had been wearing a serious expression, running over with a smile and high-fiving his father. Although Tong Tong did not say anything, he still felt a sense of accomplishment. Yang Yi and Murphy had reached a deeper level of cooperation with Rivertown. Not only did they promote the cooperation in the Sahara Desert, but also, as Guo Zhengyan had suggested, Yang Yi and Murphy would become Rivertown's tourism and cultural promotion ambassadors. However, this was voluntary. Yang Yi did not ask for a single cent of the endorsement fee from the government. On one hand, he did not need the endorsement fee, and both parties were in a mutually beneficial relationship. On the other hand, he also considered his relationship with Guo Ziyi. He was worried that someone would use this opportunity to make things difficult for Guo Zhengyan. Therefore, he did not want the endorsement fee, just like how he had done free publicity for the Southwest Military Region in the past. Some things should be done, and benefits should not be taken too seriously. Yang Yi had prepared the song today for Murphy's new album to be released at the end of the year. Of course, it was also in line with his promotion of Rivertown. However, Yang Yi and Murphy's discussion on music did not need to be repeated. Murphy played the piano. After a while, she suggested to Yang Yi, "Let's buy a professional grand piano at home. Shishi, it's time to learn how to play the piano systematically." However, Yang Yi had always been cautious about the issue of Shishi learning how to play the piano. Therefore, when he heard Murphy's request, he pondered. Chapter 1199. While her parents were discussing whether she should learn to play the piano or not, Shishi was showing off her prowess in the school's PE class. Originally, there was no chance for Shishi to show off. But when the PE class just started, the weather suddenly changed and it started to drizzle. Originally, teacher Lu Dashan was going to take the children to the sports field for soccer class. But now they can only go back to the room. Teacher Lu Dashan took out a few active children to bring out a batch of table tennis paddles and table tennis, and let them play table tennis. Shishi was one of the active children. "Little you, or let me tell you, I'm very good at table tennis now." Shishi and Lu Xiaoyu followed behind Chen Yuxuan and another boy. She beamed with joy and said to Lu Xiaoyu, Because after the holidays I play table tennis with Papa at home." "That's right. You have a table tennis table at home. Your father is so awesome." Lu Xiaoyu looked at Shishi enviously and said, "Shishi, you have a table tennis table at home?" Chen Yuxuan turned his head and asked with his eyes wide open in surprise. "That's right." Shishi nodded her small head and answered. Then she pouted her small mouth and said, "Hey Chen Yuxuan, you're eavesdropping on our conversation again." Chen Yuxuan was also a little boy who wanted to save face. He immediately snorted, turned his head and said, "Who's eavesdropping on your conversation? It's meaningless." When they played table tennis, it was almost the same as last semester. Shishi and Lu Xiaoyu, as well as Lan Xian and her deskmate Liao Qianqian. These four girls gathered together and played 2v2 doubles. "I want to be in the same team as Shishi." Before the game started, Lan Xian shouted. "What about me?" Liao Qianqian weakly asked. "I also want to be in the same team as Shishi. I'm even deskmates with Shishi." "Hee, Xian air, you can't abandon your deskmate." Lu Xiaoyu snickered. Shishi tried to smooth things over and said, "It's okay. Let's play like this first and then we'll switch teammates, okay? I can even team up with Qianqian." Liao Qianqian had a good relationship with Shishi, so she nodded happily. Although Lan Xian was a little reluctant, she didn't insist. After all, it was just ping-pong, not a competition for food. Lan Xian didn't care much. When they started to play table tennis, Shishi suddenly became active. Relying on her height and long legs, the little girl jumped around vivaciously, frequently helping Lu Xiaoyu, who was somewhat clumsy in playing table tennis, to save the ball. What? The rules don't allow it? How could there be any special rules for second graders to play table tennis? It wasn't like they took turns to play. Generally, the ball would fall on the side of the person who would receive the ball. If the ball was concentrated on one side, it would take a long time for one person to receive the ball, which was a very common thing. Lu Xiaoyu was very happy that Shishi helped her save some of the balls that she couldn't react to. For example, Liao Qianqian hit a ball that bounced high, and the ball speed was not bad. Lu Xiaoyu stood there stupidly with her mouth wide open, while Shishi ran out and laughed like a silver bell. Hee, I'll do it, I'll do it. Shishi's vigorous figure quickly landed, and then the little girl's slender and soft waist gently twisted her body sideways. Her small hand held the racket and gently pulled it up, and the ping-pong ball that fell from the air was thrown back high. It hit back to Liao Qianqian's table. Liao Qianqian pressed down on the table with one hand and held the racket high with the other hand, excitedly preparing to receive the ball. But the moment the ping-pong ball fell on the table, its trajectory suddenly changed, and its speed also became strangely fast, like a deer that suddenly changed its speed and direction, and slipped away from Liao Qianqian's racket when she was caught off guard. Huh! Liao Qianqian cried out in surprise, and stood there with a confused face. She looked at the ping-pong ball that had fallen on the ground, and then looked at her racket, as if she was doubting life. Lan Xian had seen Xishi's move before, so she didn't feel surprised. But Lu Xiaoyu realized it later, and after a while she cried out in surprise, "Wow! Xishi, your ball just now was so magical. Why did it suddenly change?" Xishi giggled and said sweetly, "Yes, my papa taught me this. It's called pulling the ball." The little girl also taught her friends enthusiastically, and while doing a sideways pulling posture, she said, "That's it. My papa said that when you pull the ball like this, the ping-pong ball will suddenly change direction, and then it will run to the side, and it will be difficult to catch it." Although Xishi was very willing to teach her friends the skills she had learned, these advanced ping-pong skills were not easy to learn. Lu Xiaoyu and Liao Qianqian, who were in high spirits, either didn't react in time, and didn't touch the ball when pulling, or directly hit the ball high and far away. Ha 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 ha. Sisi was so amused by her little friends that she ran around enthusiastically, trying to correct their postures while laughing delightfully. Lan Qing was going to have a hard time, because after one round, Lan Xian got her wish to be in the same team with Xishi, and she didn't have to feel crushed anymore. But after picking up the ping-pong ball several times, the little girl, who was out of breath, didn't want to be in the same team anymore. She pouted and shouted, "Oh, don't play like this, okay? It's not fun. How can we play when we keep picking up the ball?" When they got home in the evening, Xishi went to her father, a little depressed, and told him what had happened in the PE class. She said confusedly, later, everyone said that we can't pull the ball. But they still don't think it's fun, because they can't catch the ball I hit a lot of times, and Xian is unhappy when she's not in the same team with me. Yang Yi understood. During the summer vacation, he saw that Xishi was interested in ping-pong, so he often played ping-pong with her, and taught her some complicated skills. The little girl was quite talented, and after 2 months, she could play like a little athlete. Xishi could play ping-pong with her father, not to mention those children who didn't learn much ping-pong. But this disadvantage also appeared. Among the children of the same age and in her class, Xishi was too good, even a little invincible. She was so good that when other children played ping-pong with Xishi, they felt the pain of being crushed, just like Lan Xian, who didn't want to stand opposite Xishi. Maybe today's ping-pong game hadn't reached the point where her friends were tired of it, but if Xishi continued to be so invincible, he was afraid that in the future, no one would be willing to play ping-pong with Xishi in the PE class. Yang Yi hesitated for a moment, and found that this problem was a little unsolvable. After all, he couldn't let other children learn ping-pong so hard, so that they could catch up with Xishi, who had left them far behind. He also didn't want Xishi to be isolated by other classmates. That's all you can do. When you're at home, you can play ping-pong with your father as much as you want. But when you play ping-pong with others at school, you can't use all your strength. You have to learn to restrain your strength. For example, you have to consider what kind of ball you should hit when Xiaoyu is standing opposite you, so that Xiaoyu can catch it. Yang Yi said with a wry smile. That's difficult. Little fishy can't catch many balls. It has to be very, very light and very, very slow. Sisi blinked her big eyes in confusion. Why do you have to play like this? Because Xiaoyu and the others can't catch the balls you hit. If they can't play, they won't want to play with you. Yang Yi spread out his hands and said softly, "You don't want them to be unwilling to play with you, do you?" Xishi nodded quickly, then shook her head. She pouted and said with grievance, No, I don't want them to play with me. I want to play with them. It's like running. When I run with you, I have to slow down so that you can keep up with me. If I run far away and you can't see me, you won't want to play with me, right?" Yang Yi said with a smile. It's the same reason. When we get along with our friends, we also have to consider their feelings. We can't make our friends feel uncomfortable just because we want to play ping pong. Shishi took her father's hand, twisted her little but sadly, and whispered, Then, Papa, what should I do? You have to learn to restrain your strength. See how they like to play. Then you can hit some balls that they can catch. Yang Yi said with a smile. Speaking of which, it's also very difficult. It's not less difficult than playing pull, draw, and small angle balls. Let's have a try, okay? Just take it as a challenge. Let's try our best to conquer it. In this way, we can have more fun with our friends. Why not have a try? All right. I'll challenge it too. The little girl inexplicably regained her interest and nodded energetically to her father. Chapter 1200. Seeing that Shishi had regained her interest, Yang Yi struck while the iron was hot. He smiled and asked Shishi, Shishi, Daddy wants to discuss something with you, okay? Okay. The little girl bounced to her little desk and was about to take out her textbooks and homework to do her homework. Hearing her father's words, she curiously turned her little head and said in a cheerful voice, Today your mother and I had a discussion, because your mother said that now that you're so big, it's time to learn how to play the piano with your mother. Yang Yi said softly. Shishi blinked her eyes, tilted her little head, and asked puzzledly, But didn't I learn how to play the piano from Mom? I can play the piano. Shishi was referring to when she was in the coffee shop or in the studio's recording studio. She would pretend to play on the piano. Yang Yi laughed, rubbed the little girl's cute little head, and said, That's not the same. When we talk about learning how to play the piano, we don't mean randomly pressing the keys on the piano. Instead, we want you to be like Daddy, who can use the correct posture to play a beautiful song. This guy even pulled Shishi's little stool to sit down and assumed the posture of playing the piano. He even had an intoxicated look on his face, as if Uncle Fei was singing. Hehehehe. Shishi was amused by her father's exaggerated performance. She grabbed her father's arm, puffed out her little chest, and raised her little head to laugh for a while. Then she crisply responded, Okay, I want to learn how to play the piano from Daddy. Yang Yi was overjoyed, but he still coughed twice, waved his hand, and said, Shishi, don't decide so quickly. Daddy wants to tell you what to do in the future if you want to learn how to play the piano. Yang Yi's expression became serious. He counted with his fingers and said to Shishi, Right now we're waiting for you to finish your homework. Then we'll have dinner together and go for a walk. And walk Steamed Bun. Steamed Bun will also go for a walk with us. Shishi added eagerly. You can't interrupt when others are talking. It's impolite. Yang Yi pinched Shishi's little nose and said with a smile, If you want to talk, you have to wait for me to finish. Understand? Although Yang Yi didn't mind, he considered that Shishi was talkative. If he allowed her to continue like this little girl would easily be annoying in the future. Therefore, Yang Yi wanted to gradually teach Shishi some etiquette, so that this little girl who couldn't stop herself would learn to hold back at appropriate times. Of course, Yang Yi would not deny Shishi the opportunity to tell her story at length. On the contrary, Yang Yi encouraged Shishi to continue to tell her story, allowing her to constantly hone her eloquence. However, she had to pay attention to the occasion. The little girl shrunk her head embarrassedly and giggled. After the walk, I usually let you watch TV. Then I'll take a shower, read a book, and sleep. Yang Yi listed out briefly and then said softly, But there will be a little change in the future. After we come back from the walk, you can also watch cartoons, but you can only watch for an hour. Isn't your cartoon only on until 8:30? In other words, after 8:30 we can't watch TV. You can take a shower first, then go downstairs and practice playing the piano. Usually from Monday to Friday, you have to seriously play the piano for half an hour before you can read a book and sleep. On the weekend, we will choose a free time in the morning or afternoon to practice for an hour. Shishi looked at her father in surprise. At this time, she felt that things weren't as simple as they seemed. Yang Yi smiled and said, So if you really want to learn how to play the piano, You have to treat it as seriously as you do your homework. Also, I'll tell you the truth. You see how good your parents are, but whether it's learning how to play the piano, learn how to dance, or learn how to sing, it will take a long time and perseverance to practice. Look at your mother. Doesn't she wake up every morning to practice her voice? Only now did she understand that learning how to play the piano wasn't as simple as playing in front of the piano as she had imagined. It actually required so much practice, and she wouldn't have the opportunity to watch other TV shows with her parents in the future. Regarding this, she couldn't help but be a little absent-minded. After nodding her little head blankly, the little girl carefully grabbed her father's hand and snuggled up to him, who was sitting on her chair. Her eyes were delicate, and she looked very delicate. Every success isn't easy to come by. Yang Yi gently stroked Xishi's soft hair and gently enlightened her. Think about it, at the end of last semester, you finally got the first place in class and even received Teacher Li's praise. Was it because you had been paying attention in class and doing your homework seriously? The other children didn't work as hard as you, so they couldn't compare to you. You were the best. Her father suddenly talked about his happiest moment. Xishi came back to her senses and shyly twisted her body next to her father, giggling. It's the same for playing the piano. If you want to be like your parents and be able to play good music, you also need to spend some time practicing hard. Yang Yi struck while the iron was hot and said, but you don't have to worry. When you practice the piano, your parents will be by your side, teaching you how to play the piano, and practicing with you. That way, you won't feel lonely. In fact, Murphy's requirements were even stricter. When she discussed with Yang Yi in the morning, she wanted Xishi to learn piano for 1 or 2 hours a day, using the standard that Zhou Mingyu had taught her in the past. When I was 6 years old, I could already play the piano and the violin on American TV shows. Murphy said to Yang Yi at that time. At that time, I really spent a lot of time learning, and that's how I got to where I am now. However, Yang Yi didn't want Xishi to lose the happiness that she should have. He argued with Murphy for a long time, and in the end he only allowed Xishi to practice the piano for half an hour. Xishi's 1 hour of free time to watch cartoons was reserved. At the same time, Yang Yi also reserved 1 hour of free time for Xishi before she went to bed. During this 1 hour, Xishi would sometimes video chat with Lu Weisha, talking about interesting things that happened around her. Sometimes, she would take out her dolls to play house. Of course, there was also reading before she went to bed. It was worth mentioning that Xishi would often read books with Tong Tong. Although Tong Tong couldn't understand books, he liked to stick to his sister and listen to her excitedly read the stories in the books. Compared to other children who were pressured by heavy schoolwork, such as Lan Xian, who had a big problem doing homework, and compared to other children who had to make up for various classes, such as Yang Luoqi, who often didn't have time to go to Xishi's house to play on weekends, Xishi could only practice piano with her parents for half an hour at home. She was already very happy to be able to play freely for the rest of the time. Although Yang Yi hoped that Xishi could grow up to be a very outstanding girl, he also hoped that Xishi could have a happy childhood, where the family didn't have to worry about food and clothing. If Xishi didn't want to learn piano, Yang Yi wouldn't force her. Therefore, after some description and persuasion, Yang Yi smiled at Xishi and said, after listening to what Papa said, if you feel that learning piano every day is very tiring and you don't want to learn, it's okay. We can still watch TV together at night like before. But if you still want to learn piano from Papa or Mama, then you have to work hard in the future. You can't give up halfway, or else Papa and Mama will be disappointed. Of course, Papa and Mama still believe that you are a girl with a lot of perseverance. When you play piano in the future, you will be better than Papa and Mama. It was rare for Xishi to patiently listen to her father's words. She hesitated for a moment, then pouted and said, I also want to play the piano very well like Papa, but I only want Papa to teach me, okay? Murphy, who was hiding and eavesdropping nervously, was speechless. Chapter 1201. Yang Yi knew that Murphy was eavesdropping, because Yang Yi wanted to talk to Xishi. It was also the result of their discussion during the day in the studio. Therefore, when he heard that Xishi only wanted him to teach her, Yang Yi was a little surprised at first, and then he immediately imagined what kind of complicated expression Murphy would have when she heard this sentence. It should be known that the idea of letting Shishi learn to play the piano was put forward by Murphy. Murphy naturally wanted to cultivate Shishi to become a versatile girl like her mother. In other words, Murphy wanted to teach Shishi herself, instead of finding another pianist outside. Although Yang Yi usually liked to be jealous of Murphy because of their children's preferences, that was only a joke. In fact, Yang Yi still put his wife first in his heart. Therefore, after feeling sorry for Murphy for a second, Yang Yi quickly coughed twice and said to Shishi, "Shishi, it may not be possible for Papa to teach you alone. Because sometimes Papa is not free, Papa and Mama will teach you together, okay?" Shishi pouted her small mouth, shook her small head, and wanted to speak. Yang Yi's eyes were sharp and his hands were quick. He quickly covered the little girl's mouth, and then winked at her. Shishi could not speak, and was still a little confused. Seeing her father's crazy winks, she was even more confused. After waiting for her father to loosen his hand, Shishi asked doubtfully, "Papa, what's wrong with you? Did sand get in your eyes?" The little girl was also convinced by her sudden whim. She very considerately came over, pressed her two small hands on her father's shoulders, looked left and right, and the enthusiasm of concern on her little face was incisive and vivid. She also asked, "Papa, do you want me to blow it for you?" During this summer vacation, when they were in their hometown, Murphy once had sand in her eyes. It was Yang Yi who carefully blew it out for her. Shishi and Tong Tong were watching at that time, so the little girl remembered it very clearly. Yang Yi smiled and rubbed the little girl's head, saying, "Papa is fine. Thank you, Shishi, for your concern." Then he got up from Shishi's small chair and said loudly, "Well, it's getting late. Hurry up and do your homework. Papa also has to cook dinner. Otherwise, after dinner, your cartoon will start before we come back from our walk." This sentence carried a lot of weight. Cece cried out in surprise, "That's right. Hurry up, it's time to do your homework." The little girl shouted, quickly took out her textbooks and workbooks, and sat at the desk to study. Yang Yi watched for a while, turned around and glanced at Murphy, who had unknowingly revealed a little of her skirt by the wall. He smiled and went back to the kitchen. Sure enough, after a while Murphy slightly pouted her red lips and strolled into the kitchen. In fact, Murphy also knew that Yang Yi had covered up the matter just now, but it was better than being sad in the beginning. She hugged Yang Yi's thick waist and buried her head in Yang Yi's broad back. Yang Yi put the cut ingredients into the boiling soup, closed the lid, and washed his hands. He smiled and gently patted the back of Murphy's hand and said, "Okay, how old are you? You're still upset over such a small matter?" Murphy's forehead was pressed against Yang Yi's, and she turned her head hard on Yang Yi's back. After venting for a while, she muttered, "I'm wronged. Please comfort me." Yang Yi carried her to the front and said with a smile, Okay. Come, let your hubby hug you." Murphy was comfortably hugged by Yang Yi. After a while, she raised her head and asked gloomily, "Why doesn't she like me teaching her piano?" "No, she didn't say that she doesn't like you teaching her piano. She said that she only likes me to teach her piano." Yang Yi quibbled. "Think about it, you don't usually play the piano at home. Whether it's the guitar or the electronic piano upstairs, it's all played by me. You're only responsible for singing, so she didn't think of you. Instead, she said that she doesn't want an outsider to teach her. She doesn't like the music teacher in her class who only knows how to sing, so she wants me to teach her." Murphy looked at Yang Yi suspiciously and asked doubtfully, "Is that really the case?" "Yes." Yang Yi nodded solemnly. "Didn't you see that later when I said that Dad and Mom would teach her piano together, she didn't refuse?" Murphy frowned slightly and muttered, "That seems to make sense. It must be like that. Don't worry about it. Our Shishi is so obedient." Yang Yi smiled and patted Murphy's back. Then he gently kissed her forehead and said with a smile, "You're still acting like a spoiled child. Look at your forehead, it's red." Just when Yang Yi was kissing Murphy, Tong Tong, who couldn't find his mother in the living room, came looking for her. He passed by his sister who was seriously doing her homework, and then poked his little head into the kitchen that wasn't closed, just in time to see this scene. Yang Yi heard the noise and turned his head to look, but the little guy shrank his head back and ran away for some reason. "Oh no, you've been seen by mommy," Yang Yi said with a smile. After experiencing Cece's betrayal, Mo Fei was a little dependent on Yang Yi at the moment. She refused to let go of Yang Yi's arms and hugged him tightly. She snorted and said, "So what if you see it? It's natural for a mother to hug a father." "That's right, you little brats are always hugging dad, and you're not allowing mom to hug you?" On the other hand, outside the kitchen, after little Momo ran away, she ran to the side of her sister's table, grabbed her sister's thigh, shook it, and called out in a childish voice, "Sister, sister. Brother, don't disturb sister. Sister has to do her homework." Shishi helplessly turned her head and said, "Little mommy didn't care about what his sister said." He excitedly turned around and pointed to the kitchen. Then he looked up at his sister and tried to describe, "Papa, Papa, Mama, I want a kiss." It seemed like there was an additional word, want, but this was the best explanation Tong Tong could give at this stage. Therefore, after a while, Murphy, who was speaking eloquently just a moment ago, let go of Yang Yi's hand with a red face. She looked at the two little heads that were poking their heads over and said unhappily, "Yang Shi, why are you here to be naughty? Don't you want to do your homework?" Shishi snickered and ran away with her little brother. These little episodes were nothing. Before going to bed at night, when Yang Yi was reading with Shishi, he brought up the question that he had interrupted in the evening again. "Shishi, Dad wants to ask you a question," Yang Yi said softly. "Why don't you want Mom to teach you how to play the piano?" Shishi blinked and said, "Because I want Papa to teach me how to play the piano." Of course, before Yang Yi could continue to ask, Shishi said the rest of her willingness. The little girl slightly pouted and said, "When Mom taught me, she was very fierce. I still like Papa." "When Mom taught you, was she very strict? So sometimes, you are very afraid of Mom?" Yang Yi asked carefully. "Yes." Shishi nodded her little head. "But what Mom taught you, such as teaching you how to dance, you actually like what Mom taught you, right? Because Dad saw that you learned very well. You know that Dad doesn't know how to dance, but Dad is still very pleased to see you learn so well," Yang Yi said with a smile. "If Mom didn't get angry so easily when she taught you, and was also more kind, like Dad, using more good methods to teach you, wouldn't it be easier for you to accept it?" Yang Yi wanted to understand clearly, and then privately change a way to tactfully mention it to Murphy. Shishi nodded and said seriously, "Yes, I like Papa to teach me. It doesn't matter, everyone has shortcomings. Both Dad and Mom have them. Dad will also help Mom improve, make you like Mom more, and then you will also like Mom to teach you how to play the piano. Okay?" Yang Yi said with a smile. "You don't know, but Mom hopes that you can play the piano. She thinks that after you learn how to play the piano, you will be as beautiful and talented as Mom, so she has always wanted to teach you how to play the piano. She is very concerned about you." Shishi opened her eyes wide, looked at her father, and then shyly smiled, and then hugged her father's hand bashfully and said with a smile, Then, I will also like Mom, because I like Mom very much, but I don't like Mom to be fierce when teaching me. In the future, I will like Mom." Seeing the little girl trying her best to explain, Yang Yi laughed heartily. "Then Daddy promises you that Mommy will be like Daddy in the future. As long as you're obedient, Mommy won't lose her temper at any time. That way you can like Mommy all the time." Yang Yi also deliberately learned Shishi's way of expression. Chapter 1202. One morning, Cece carried her small school bag to the backyard to take a look at the two chicks in the cage before she was about to go to school. Although she had fed them in the morning, Shishi was still worried about them, so she came to say goodbye to them. The little girl pressed her school uniform skirt, squatted down, and poked the chicks near the cage. The chicks reacted immediately, but they just twisted their little buttocks, turned their heads inside, and pointed their buttocks at Shishi. The two chicks were much stronger than when they first arrived at home, but they were still shy and liked to squeeze together. "Big yellow, little yellow, I'm going to school," Cece muttered in a low voice. "You have to be good at home. Mama and Papa will give you something to eat." Then, I'll come back at night and take you out for a walk. She had said this many times. Almost every time she went to school, she would say goodbye to them. Of course, she didn't treat these chicks differently. She would also say goodbye to Bao Bao, Xiao Guai, and the others. But for these guys, she just had to say goodbye to them. She didn't have to come specially. Are you still not ready? Xian Air is already here. At this time, Yang Yi shouted in front. She reluctantly moved her eyes away from the two chicks that looked like meatballs. She jumped up lightly and shouted briskly, "I'm coming." He saw the little girl with a clear and melodious laugh, lifting the hem of her skirt and running over like a wisp of smoke. She was not ladylike at all. But what kind of ladylike was needed? She was lively, clever, and very likable. After Yang Yi sent the two girls to school, he went to the coffee shop of Jiang City Media University. Today he had an appointment with Lu Xiaoshu and Miao Chuan to meet at the coffee shop. After debuting, Lu Xiaoshu and Mao Chuan's outfits had changed quite a bit. Although the two of them were not extravagant people, their clothes were all bought with the help of their managers. The two of them picked the most low-profile outfits to wear, but they still felt more spirited and decent than before. This was a good thing. Yang Yi didn't think that folk singers had to dress sloppily and be travel-worn to look like folk singers. After some greetings, they came to Yang Yi's exclusive booth and sat down. Yang Yi smiled and pointed at Lu Xiaoshu and Miao Chuan, saying, "You too. After your debut, you don't treat me as your brother Yang anymore." Miao Chuan waved his hand in embarrassment. Lu Xiaoshu also scratched his head embarrassedly and said, "No, brother Yang." "Yang, Yang Yi Yang, 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 Yang," Yang Yi complained. "I told you that I didn't set up Hua Yi Brothers Company to exploit you. I just wanted to give us a platform to not be exploited. If you have any ideas, you should say it openly. Don't keep it in your heart. I only found out when Sugar Cube secretly told Ding Xiang." Facing Yang Yi's blame, Lu Xiaoshu and Miao Chuan not only didn't want to explain, but also lowered their heads in shame and apologized in a low voice. "Sorry, brother Yang. We failed to live up to your expectations." Yang Yi waved his hand and smiled. "What are you apologizing for? I should be the one apologizing. I was only concerned about Murphy's concert and the children's affairs. I didn't care much about you." Lu Xiaoshu and Miao Chuan quickly waved their hands. Yang Yi didn't want to beat around the bush with his own people. He gently waved his hand and said, "Okay, let's not talk about this today. Let's talk about your future plans. My plan is to arrange a vacation for you. You should have a good rest and don't ruin your health. Then you can tell me, what do you want to do after the vacation? I want to hear your thoughts." Lu Xiaoshu and Miao Chuan looked at each other. In the end, it was Lu Xiaoshu who spoke. He whispered embarrassedly, "Brother Yang, in the future, we can still take on some jobs, but not too often. We found that after taking on too many jobs, we don't have time to think or inspiration to write new songs." Yang Yi waved his hand and said with a smile, "Jobs are a bit troublesome. Don't say that you can take on some jobs. If you don't like it, I can make the decision and ask Mo Xiaowan not to arrange anything for you. Just like Murphy, we don't ask for exposure. We just need to come up with sincere works to impress the fans." Lu Xiaoshu and Miao Chuan were happy at first, but then they felt bad and whispered, "Sister Xiaowan is doing it for our own good. In fact, we can still take on some jobs. My suggestion is that if you don't like it, don't take it. Of course, it depends on your own thoughts." Yang Yi smiled and said, "In the free time, I suggest that you settle down and receive some systematic music composition training. I can invite some older folk song composers to communicate with you. In addition, the inspiration for composition should come from your daily life experience. I also suggest that you go out and travel. Go to the prairie or other cities to have a look. Maybe inspiration will come." Lu Xiaoshu and Miao Chuan really wanted to walk on the path of creative folk singers. They said so before they debuted. Now, after experiencing a busy life, they found that they really yearned for the life of a folk song senior, who carried a guitar and traveled the world. Therefore, when Yang Yi proposed this, Lu Xiaoshu and Miao Chuan both showed an expression of yearning. "Then it's settled." Yang Yi touched his chin and pondered for a while. then smiled and said, I'll arrange a 2-month public expense trip for you. No need, Brother Yang. How can we let you give us the money to go on a trip? Lu Xiaoshu said gratefully, Miao Chuan and I have saved some money. How long have you guys been in the industry? Keep the money you saved for your marriage. Yang Yi smiled and said, Let me tell you, I have requirements for this public expense trip. In these 2 months, not only do you have to travel, but you also have to experience life. Use your eyes to observe, and when you come back, you have to hand in 2 songs for me to check as homework. No problem, Miao Chuan said excitedly. We will definitely write better songs for you, Brother Yang. Your songs are not for me, but for yourselves. Yang Yi corrected. Yang Yi looked at Miao Chuan, and suddenly remembered a piece of gossip that Murphy told him. He smiled and said in a tone that left no room for discussion. In order to remind you guys not to be playful, and at the same time treat it as a reward for Sugar Cube, who has worked hard for a year and took the initiative to tell me about your abnormalities, you have to take Sugar Cube with you on this trip. You have to discuss with Sugar Cube where to go and how to plan the 2-month trip. Ah! Lu Xiaoshu and Miao Chuan both cried out in surprise. Yang Yi smiled and raised his chin at Lu Xiaoshu saying, Xiaoshu, if you have a female companion, you can also ask her out. Otherwise, it will be very awkward for you. Lu Xiaoshu instantly understood. He also chuckled, causing Miao Chuan's face to turn red from laughing. No, Sai, it's not like that. Miao Chuan stammered and said embarrassedly. It was indeed not like that. Sugar Cube liked Miao Chuan, and this was more obvious. But Miao Chuan had never considered the problem of getting a girlfriend, and he was also a little silly in this aspect, so he had never noticed Sugar Cube's admiration. It was also because Yang Yi brought up this matter that Miao Chuan became shy. Who knew what would happen in the future? Chapter 1203. In the morning, when Shishi went to school, she still had a bright smile on her face. Her mood was as cheerful as the birds singing in the school. In class, Shishi was very popular. When she walked into the classroom, many students greeted her. The girl giggled and responded with a loud voice. But when she passed by Jiang Chen's seat, Shishi was almost bumped into by Jiang Chen again. Jiang Chen was an active and naughty guy who couldn't control his impulses. In the past, he always stuck out his foot to scare the pretty girls, but since Yang Yi and a few other parents complained to the homeroom teacher, Jiang Chen restrained himself a lot. But he changed his way of bumping them. To put it bluntly, it was hormones at work. But some boys tried to show their good side to beautiful girls, just like a peacock spreading its tail. Jiang Chen, on the other hand, didn't know what was good for him and didn't know what was good for him. He always wanted to tease girls, either by extending his foot or putting some bugs in their drawers. Anyway, he used all kinds of tricks. When he saw the girls scared out of their wits, he felt smug. Just as Shishi was about to pass by him, Jiang Chen suddenly stood up from his seat, turned around, faced his own table, and squeezed past Shishi. But Jiang Chen miscalculated. He was facing Shishi. Although the girl didn't expect this guy to do something so annoying, she reacted quickly and subconsciously took 2 steps back to avoid him. Jiang Chen, what are you doing? Shishi paused for a moment and then asked angrily. Jiang Chen still didn't admit it. He said shamelessly, What? Can't I pick up a pen? He threw a pen on his table on the ground and bent down to pick it up. Then, like a rooster who won a fight, he raised his head and proudly winked at his deskmate, another boy who was also very naughty. You. Shishi was exasperated. However, the little girl still remembered what her father had told her to ignore these naughty children. If they went too far, she could tell her father or the teacher. Therefore, Cici didn't feel like she was affected, so she ignored him. She deliberately walked through the 2 seats and went around him to return to her seat. Cici managed to escape this calamity. But Lu Xiaoyu wasn't as skillful as her. Lu Xiaoyu was also a pretty girl. She came a little later than Shishi. When she passed by Shishi's deskmate, she was happily calling Shishi's name. But Jiang Chen's deskmate copied Jiang Chen and did the same thing. He got up, turned around and stuck out his butt. Lu Xiaoyu wasn't paying attention, and his buttocks bumped into her waist. Caught off guard, Lu Xiaoyu bumped into the table next to her. Little fishy. She witnessed this scene with her own eyes. She exclaimed and stood up anxiously. Lu Xiaoyu's injuries weren't too serious, and it didn't hurt too much either. However, she was panicking when she heard another crisp sound. She turned her head around to take a look, and saw that the Teru dolls hanging from her bag had been crushed to pieces. Lu Xiaoyu suddenly felt anxious and sad. The little girl sniffled, squatted down, put her hands on her knees, buried her head in them, and began to cry. Little fishy, are you okay? She immediately ran over and squatted down beside Lu Xiaoyu worriedly. Little fishy, what's wrong? Lan Xian also saw the commotion. The warm-hearted chubby girl also stood up from her seat and asked loudly, They're bullying me. When she saw Lu Xiaoyu crying so sadly, her eyes turned red. Tears rolled down her cheeks as she pointed at Jiang Chen and his deskmate. In fact, when Jiang Chen's deskmate saw the girl crying, he also panicked. They only wanted to tease the girl, not scare her to tears. If she cried, the problem would escalate to another level. Jiang Chen still said with conviction, What does it have to do with me? At this time, Chao Ruolin, who was re-elected as the class monitor, slammed down her textbook, stood up from her chair, and shouted, I'll go tell the teacher. With that, she quickly ran out. Don't tell the teacher. Jiang Chen's deskmate anxiously looked at Chao Ruolin, but he only saw Chao Ruolin's figure disappear outside the door. He couldn't help but mutter in panic. I didn't do it on purpose, no, she doesn't hurt. Lu Xiaoyu was crying so hard that Xishi's comfort was useless until the homeroom teacher, Li Ruolin, was called over. What's going on? Yangxi, why is Lu Xiaoyu crying? Li Ruolin probably felt that Xishi was good at expressing herself, and could describe the situation clearly, so she asked about Xishi. Xishi didn't disappoint the teacher. The little girl pouted, stood up, and first pointed at Jiang Chen and said, It's Jiang Chen and Liang Wenjie. They like to suddenly stand up and bump into us. Jiang Chen almost bumped into me, but I dodged. Then little fishy was bumped into by Liang Wenjie. Little fishy was in so much pain that she cried. Perhaps encouraged by Xishi, two girls sitting in the back also stood up to complain about Jiang Chen and Liang Wenjie. Li Ruolin understood. She was a little helpless and a little angry as she pointed at the two boys with their heads down and said, You two, what did the teacher tell you? When you come to school, you have to study hard. Don't tease your classmates. For this morning's class, Jiang Chen and Liang Wenjie, go to the back of the classroom and stand in class. Li Ruolin said sternly with a straight face. Of course, she would also inform Jiang Chen and Liang Wenjie's parents. This was not the first time this had happened. Covering up for disobedient students would only make them worse. Only teachers and parents working together to teach them a lesson would be effective. The two culprits were punished, but Lu Xiaoyu was still very sad. My Tera Bozu boohoo, they're broken. Lu Xiaoyu pouted and finally told the reason for her sadness under the teacher's questioning. I see. It's okay, they're just two little dolls. Don't take it to heart, as long as you didn't fall. Li Ruolin let out a sigh of relief and comforted her with a smile. Adults and children looked at problems from different perspectives. Li Ruolin didn't know how important these two Teru Bozu were to children. Lu Xiaoyu changed her bag, but she still hung the Teru Bozu on her new bag. It was obvious how much she loved these two dolls. Seeing Li Ruolin pick up all the broken pieces of the Teru Bozu and throw them into the trash because she was worried they would cut their hands or feet, Lu Xiaoyu's tears began to fall again. Under the teacher's persuasion, Lu Xiaoyu and Xishi returned to their seats, but Lu Xiaoyu still said to Xishi sadly, Xishi, what should I do? My Teru Bozu is broken. Xishi also felt sorry for her little friend. She frowned and said, that's right, they're all broken. I can't even glue them back together. Wawa, Xishi, this is my favorite Teru Bozu, and it was given to me by Big Sister Xiaowei. If Big Sister Xiaowei finds out that I broke it, Wawa, what will I do? Lu Xiaoyu sobbed. Will she blame me for not protecting her gift well? If I had known, I would have left it at home like you did. This if I had known was a little too long ago. After all, It had already been half a year since Yu Xiaowei gave her the Terabozu. Who would have thought of this problem so early? No, Shishi had mentioned this concern before. Shishi tilted her head. Although she was a little reluctant, for the sake of her little friend, she still said softly, why don't we do this? Little Yu. I'll give you one of my Terabozu, okay? You can hang one on your bag and big sister Xiaowei won't be unhappy. Then you and I can both have Terabozu. Really? Lu Xiaoyu looked at Shishi with tears in her eyes and asked in surprise. Shishi nodded. Seeing that her little friend was happy, her mood also improved. She smiled generously and said, that's right, we can. But which one do you like? Is it blue or red? I'll give it to you tomorrow. Chapter 1204. Shishi didn't take the two boys' mischievous actions to heart. Instead, she was more concerned about the two broken Terra dolls. However, when the girl returned home in the evening, the sadness of having to say goodbye to her Terra dolls was temporarily dispelled by a new guest in the house. Some of the large cabinets and tables in the side hall had been moved away. Even Xiao Guai, Xiao Gray, and Dondu's cat tree and cat bed had been moved to the living room. Steamed Bun's dog bed was originally placed in the corner of the stairs, so it escaped the disaster. Unfortunately, Xiao Guai and the other 3 cat toilets had been moved to the corner of the stairs. Although the cat toilets were placed in the innermost part of the house, which was a few meters away from Steamed Bun's dog bed, it was still Steamed Bun's territory that had been invaded. However, Steamed Bun was no match for the 3 fat cats, so he could only put his head on his paws and accept it. The side hall was now very spacious and bright. A Theodore grand piano of the same brand as the one in the coffee shop, but much more beautiful and high-end, was placed in the middle. It stood there quietly with 3 sturdy legs. The elegant black finish and smooth curved surface instantly gave people a sense of stability and grandeur. Of course, the only fly in the ointment was that Yang Yi had wrapped the kickstand, the bottom edge of the piano, and even the periphery of the piano stool with a soft black material. It was like a bubble, and even if it bumped into it, it would have a cushioning effect. Although the color of these soft materials could blend in with the piano as much as possible, there was still a difference in color. Therefore, to a certain extent, it reduced the beauty of the piano. But what did that matter? For the sake of the child's safety, Yang Yi had made a lot of protective devices. Not to mention that the other furniture in the house had similar packages. The piano's cover and top cover were equipped with an electro-hydraulic device similar to the electric tailgate of a car. Not only could it be opened and closed electrically, but it also had an intelligent sensor and automatic stop function to prevent the child's hand from being caught. Not to mention this piano was top-notch in terms of timbre and configuration. But in Cece's opinion, what surprised her the most was the beauty of this piano. When the little girl was brought to the side hall by her father to see it, she was pleasantly surprised and let out a wow. So beautiful. Fascinated, Shishi reached out and stroked the piano's lacquer surface. It was as smooth and delicate as marble. It was very comfortable to touch, and the little girl could see the beautiful golden strings inside. No wonder she couldn't help but admire it. Tong Tong followed behind his sister. Originally, Tong Tong was not interested in playing the piano, but he liked to imitate his sister's movements. The little guy also raised his hand high and touched the piano's paint. He giggled and shouted, "Wow! How is it?" Yang Yi smiled and said to Shishi, "You're going to start learning piano with Daddy tonight." "Sure," Shishi replied casually. She seemed a little perfunctory because she was thinking about something else. The little girl's eyes suddenly lit up. She turned and ran upstairs. From afar, the little girl's cheerful laughter could be heard. Hee, wait a minute." Yang Yi and Tong Tong were a little confused by Shishi's sudden outburst. Yang Yi turned to look at Tong Tong. Coincidentally, Tong Tong also looked over. The 2 pairs of eyes, one big and one small, were looking at each other as if they were having a conversation. "Daddy, what's wrong with your sister? Momo. _ Daddy, do you know? Momo. O_O? Fortunately, Shishi ran back quickly and ended the awkward exchange of glances between her father and little brother. The little girl happily placed a snow doll that she was holding in her arms on the piano, right next to the music score. The snow-white doll contrasted sharply with the dark black piano board. However, Yang could not help but frown. He coughed twice and said, "Shishi, why did you put a snowbow doll on the piano?" Shishi turned around and looked at her father excitedly with her big bright eyes. She said clearly, "Because it looks good." Yang could not help but complain in his heart, who said, "Snowbow is not good looking." However, this was the piano that Shishi used for practice. Yang thought about it and decided to bear with it. However, at this moment, Tong Tong seemed to have been inspired by his sister's actions. He chuckled and ran to the living room. The little guy quickly grabbed a small robot and smiled at his sister. He handed it to his sister and said in a childish voice, "Sister, for you." Shishi was stunned for a moment. She took Tong Tong's robot and looked at it. She quickly shook her head and said, "No, brother, it won't look good like this." Tong Tong was inexplicably excited. He jumped on the ground excitedly and clenched his little fists. He laughed and said, "It looks good, it looks good." Shishi could not persuade her brother. She muttered awkwardly, "But where should I put it?" Yang was secretly happy. He thought that it might be interesting to put his sister and brother's toys on the left and right sides of the piano. At least it would make this cold grand piano look more familial. Yang went to the kitchen and took out 2 new black non-slip coasters. He placed them on both sides of the piano score. Snowbow was also placed on top. Yang then turned to Shishi and said with a smile, "Put it here. In the future, your brother can also learn piano from you." Shishi placed it on top of the piano. A sense of symmetry instantly appeared. Although the colors were still a little off, Yang felt that it was a lot more comfortable visually. Tong Tong looked at it for a while. He did not care about what his father said. He only felt that his toys were placed on top of the piano. He ran away with satisfaction. After a while, he even pulled his mother over to look at the piano. After Shishi finished watching cartoons at night, she went back to her bedroom to get her clothes and was about to take a shower. When she saw the Teru Teru Bozu hanging in front of the window, she remembered that she wanted to give one to Lu Xiaoyu. The little girl's happy expression immediately turned into disappointment. Her delicate eyebrows drooped slightly. Just like Lin Daiyu, she looked at the Teru Teru Bozu pitifully. After a while, Shishi reluctantly took off the blue Teru Teru Bozu. At that time, Lu Xiaoyu asked Shishi to keep the red Teru Teru Bozu that Shishi liked. In the end, she only asked for the blue Teru Bozu. However, when she took off the blue Teru Bozu, Shishi felt reluctant. That was because the blue Teru Bozu was also very pretty. The blue painted neck was like the color of the sky. When paired with the white ceramic body, it looked like a beautiful blue sky with white clouds. "I'm going to give you to little fishy. Because both of little fishy's Teru Bozu broke today. She's so sad. Little fishy is my very, very good friend." The little girl looked like she was bidding farewell to the blue Teru Bozu. She held the Teru Bozu in her hands and mumbled sadly. After an unknown amount of time, Yang brought Shishi's washed and dried clothes upstairs. He was about to put them in the closet for Shishi when he opened the door. To his surprise, he found that the little girl was not taking a shower. Instead, she was sitting in front of the desk, hugging something with tears in her eyes. "Shishi, what's wrong?" Yang asked gently, worried. The little girl stood up. She sniffled and ran over to hug her father's waist. She buried her head in her father's chest sadly. You're tuning in to the Earbook Haven YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.